Lena did not cry when he said the words. She stood in front of everyone she had ever known, in a dress she had sewn herself over 3 long months, and she did not cry. Her hands were still. Her face was still. Only her chest moved, rising and falling in short, careful breaths, as if her body was trying very hard to stay upright, while something inside it collapsed completely. The hall was full. Every member of the Greywood pack had come. They had brought food and candles. They had dressed in their best clothes. The elder women had placed wildflowers along the long wooden tables. Someone had hung paper lanterns from the ceiling beams, and the light they gave off was soft and golden, and completely wrong for what was happening. Marcus Cole stood 3 feet away from her and said it again, louder this time, in case anyone had missed it the first time. "I am withdrawing the bond," he said. "I am choosing not to proceed." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lena had ever heard. Marcus was 26 years old, broad-shouldered, and well-liked. He had been chosen as the pack's next beta. He had dark hair that he always kept neat, and eyes that Lena had once believed were kind. She had known him since she was 9 years old. She had believed, for the past 4 years, that she would spend the rest of her life beside him. She had been wrong about a great many things. He did not look at her as he spoke. He looked at the crowd, then at the floor, then at a spot somewhere above her head. His voice was firm. He had clearly practiced this. "Lena is a good person," he said, and she almost laughed at that, except that laughing would have meant breaking, and she was not going to break here, not in front of these people. Not with their eyes on her like this, heavy and pitying and awful. "She is kind, and she is caring," Marcus continued, "but she is an Omega, and the role I am stepping into requires a partner of greater standing. I need someone who can stand beside me in strength. I need someone the pack will follow." Lena heard what he did not say. She was not strong enough. She was not impressive enough. She had no rare ability, no high rank, no bloodline that anyone in the territory had ever spoken of with admiration. She was ordinary. She had always been ordinary. She had spent years believing that love could make up for that. Standing here now, she understood that she had been foolish. The woman he turned to look at was standing near the far wall. Her name was Cora Holt. She was an alpha-blooded female, which was rare. She had arrived in Greywood 6 months ago and had immediately become the most talked-about person in the pack. She was tall and graceful and confident in the way that people who have never been told they are not enough tend to be. She looked at Lena with something that was not quite guilt and not quite triumph, but sat uncomfortably between the two. Lena looked at Cora for exactly 3 seconds, then she looked back at Marcus. "All right," Lena said. That was all. 2 words. She said them quietly and clearly, and then she turned around and walked out of the hall. She heard the whispering begin before she reached the door. She heard someone say her name. She heard an older woman make a sound of sympathy that Lena could not bear to receive. She pushed through the heavy wooden door and walked out into the night and kept walking. The air outside was cold. It was late autumn, and the temperature had dropped sharply after sunset. Lena had not brought a coat because she had expected to be inside all evening. Her arms were bare from the elbow down, and the chill hit her skin immediately. But she kept walking, because stopping felt impossible. Stopping felt like the moment everything would arrive, all at once, and she was not ready for that. She walked through the quiet streets of the pack settlement, past the row of small houses with their warm-lit windows, past the community fire pit, which was dark and cold tonight because everyone was at the hall, past the healer's building, where she had worked for the past 3 years, cleaning and organizing and caring for the sick and the injured and the very young. She stopped outside the healer's building and looked at it for a long moment. She had keys to this building. She had keys to the small supply room at the back, and to the locked cabinet where the medicines were kept, and to the side door that faced the garden. She had been given those keys because she was trusted, because she was reliable, because she showed up every single morning without being asked, and stayed late without being told, and never once complained. She reached into the small pocket in her dress and took out the keys. She held them in her palm for a moment. Then she placed them carefully on the front step. She would not be coming back. She understood that, somehow, without anyone having to tell her. Marcus's rejection had not just ended a relationship. It had ended her place here. She had no family in Greywood. Her parents had passed when she was 16, within the same year of each other. She had come to this pack because Marcus had been here, and because the healer, an older woman named Doris, had offered her work. Doris was kind, but Doris was also practical, and she answered to the pack's leadership, and Marcus was about to become that leadership. Lena picked up the small bag she had left near the edge of the path earlier that day. She had packed it that morning without fully knowing why. She had told herself it was just practical, just a habit, from the years she had spent moving between her aunt's house and her uncle's house, and various other temporary places after her parents died. But standing here now, she thought perhaps some part of her had known. Some quiet part of her that was smarter than the rest of her had been quietly preparing for this. The bag held 2 changes of clothing. A small first aid kit, because she was a healer's assistant, and that habit was bone deep. A little food, wrapped in cloth. A thin blanket. A photograph of her mother, folded carefully so the crease did not run across her face. That was everything. She put the strap over her shoulder and walked toward the edge of the settlement, toward the border, where the pack's land ended and the wild territory began. Nobody stopped her, nobody came after her. She reached the tree line and crossed into the dark woods and disappeared from Greywood entirely. She walked for a long time. The cold grew sharper as she moved deeper into the trees, away from the shelter of the buildings and the warmth of the settlement. The forest floor was soft with fallen leaves, and her shoes were not made for this, not made for rough ground in the dark, and twice she stumbled, and once she went down on one knee, and stayed there for a moment, with her hands pressing into the cold earth. She told herself she was resting. She told herself she was catching her breath. She was not crying. She was absolutely not going to cry out here in the dark by herself, because if she started she did not know when she would stop, and she could not afford that. She was going to figure out where she was going, and how she was getting there, and she was going to move forward, and that was all. Her mother had told her once, when she was very small and very upset about something she could no longer remember, that the thing about pain is that it has a shape. It arrives big and shapeless and overwhelming. But if you sit with it long enough, it starts to have edges, and once it has edges, you can hold it. And once you can hold it, you can carry it. And once you can carry it, it stops carrying you. Lena had been 7 when her mother said that, and she had not fully understood it. She understood it now. She pressed her hands flat against the cold ground and breathed. The forest around her was very quiet. The trees were mostly bare, their dark branches reaching upward against a sky that was thick with cloud. No stars tonight, no moon, just the dark and the cold and the sound of her own breathing. She thought about where she could go. She had a distant cousin 3 territories over who she had not spoken to in 2 years. She had a former colleague from a healer's training she had attended briefly, a woman named Nell, who had mentioned once that her pack welcomed wandering Omegas. She had nothing, essentially. She had options, but none of them felt real yet. They felt like words on a list. Not like places where she could actually show up and be received. She stood up. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder. She started walking again. The thing that caught her was a root. A thick root that crossed the path at ankle height, invisible in the dark. And she was moving too quickly, and thinking too hard about Nell and cousins and territories, and she did not see it, until her foot was already caught, and she was going forward, arms out, hands trying to find something that was not there. She hit the ground hard. Her knee took the worst of it, and her palms, and for a moment she just lay there on the cold forest floor, cheek against the leaves, completely still. Then she pressed herself up, and checked her hands in the dark. Her right palm was scraped. Her knee was sore but not damaged. She pulled herself upright and stood, and took one breath, and then another. And then, very quietly, so quietly that it was almost nothing at all, she began to cry. She did not make much sound. She was too tired for that, and too cold, and too determined not to fall apart completely. But the tears came anyway, and she let them because fighting them would have cost her energy she did not have. She cried for the dress she had sewn herself. She cried for 4 years of believing in something that had not been real. She cried for the photograph of her mother in her bag, and for the healer's keys on the front step, and for the way nobody had come after her, not one single person, not even someone just to check. She cried for being an Omega, in a world where that word was sometimes used like an apology. She cried for exactly as long as she needed to, and not 1 second more. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand and kept walking. She did not know it yet, but she was already crossing the border. Not the border of Greywood, which she had crossed long ago. A different border. An older one, marked by stones she could not see in the dark. A border that technically she had no right to cross. She did not know it yet. She just walked. The rain began about 2 hours into her crossing. It came without warning, no gradual mist before it, just suddenly and completely, as if a door had been opened overhead. She pulled the thin blanket from her bag and held it over her head, but it was not waterproof, and within minutes she was soaked through. Her dress, which was beautiful and completely impractical, clung to her skin. Her shoes filled with water. She stopped walking because she could no longer see more than a few feet in front of her. She found a tree with a wide trunk and pressed herself against it, pulling her knees to her chest, and waited. She was very cold. She was very wet. She was alone in a forest that was not her territory, with no home to return to and no clear place to go. She was 23 years old, and she had nothing. She closed her eyes and listened to the rain. She did not hear the footsteps until they were very close. She did not see the figure until the light appeared, a lantern, held by a hand that emerged from the dark and stopped roughly 4 feet from where she was crouched against the tree. She looked up. The man standing in front of her was tall, very tall. He was wearing a long coat that had kept off the rain far better than her blanket had, and his face was lit from below by the lantern he was carrying, which made his expression hard to read. He was looking at her with something that was not quite surprise, and not quite recognition. Something more like a person who has just found exactly what they expected to find, in exactly the wrong place, at exactly the wrong time. She had seen his face before. Not in person. In the reports that circulated between packs, the formal announcements and the warnings, and the information that healers were supposed to know. She had seen his name written at the top of territorial borders, the ones marked off-limits to Omegas traveling without escort. The ones she had just, without realizing it, crossed entirely. He was Kael Draven, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, the most powerful leader in the region, and, by every account she had ever heard, the least forgiving. She was sitting, soaking wet, on his land. She opened her mouth. She was not sure what she was going to say. Something sensible, probably. Something that would explain the situation calmly. Something that would demonstrate she was not a threat and had not come here with any intention. That she had simply been walking and crying and not paying attention to border markers in the dark. What came out instead was, "I did not see the stones." He looked at her for a long moment. "Most people don't," he said. "That is the point." His voice was low, not unkind exactly, but not warm either. It was the voice of someone who had spent a long time giving orders, and very little time explaining them. He looked at the blanket over her head, which was no longer offering any protection, and was simply wet fabric lying against her hair. He looked at her soaked dress. He looked at the bag on the ground beside her, which had a dark water stain spreading up its side. His expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Get up," he said. "I am sitting down," she said, which was entirely unnecessary information, since he could see that clearly. "I can see that," he said. "Get up anyway." She got up. Her knees protested. Her wet shoes made a sound that she chose not to think about. She stood in front of him, rain still coming down, blanket now draped uselessly around her shoulders, and looked at him with whatever dignity she had left, which was not much, but she was not going to surrender it for the rain. "You are on northern land," he said, "without permission and without escort." "I know," she said. "Do you know what the penalty for that is?" She thought about lying. She decided against it. "Removal," she said. "At minimum." "At minimum," he agreed. He looked at her for another moment. In the lantern light, his face was unreadable. He was not young, but he was not old either. There was something in his expression that she might have called tiredness, if she had been paying more attention. Something behind the authority and the sternness that looked like a person who had been standing upright for a very long time and was not entirely sure why anymore. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Away," she said. "From what?" She looked at him steadily. "Everything," she said. The rain fell between them. He looked at her for a long moment more, and she could not tell what he was thinking. And she was very cold and very tired, and she simply stood there and waited for whatever happened next. "Come," he said finally, and turned and walked back into the dark. She stood still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her bag and followed him. She did not know why. She was not sure it was the wisest thing she had ever done. But she was wet and cold and alone in the dark, and he had a lantern, and sometimes that is simply enough. She followed him through the trees, through the rain, toward a light that grew slowly in the distance, becoming windows, becoming walls, becoming a structure far larger than she had expected. She followed him all the way to the edge of what she would later learn was the Northern Palace grounds, and she stopped at the gate and looked up at the building before her, vast and dark and lit only partially against the night sky. She thought, this is probably a mistake. Then she walked through the gate anyway. The inside of the Northern Palace was nothing like she had imagined. She had imagined something cold and grand and empty, all stone floors and high ceilings, and the kind of silence that collects in places where people have given orders for so long that regular sound has stopped trying. That was what the stories said. That was what the reports described, in their careful, neutral language. The Northern Realm, seat of Alpha King Draven, formal and distant and not welcoming to outsiders. The entrance hall was warm. That was the first thing she noticed. There was a fire burning in a wide stone hearth at the far end of the hall, and it was a real fire, not a decorative one, the kind that someone had tended recently and would tend again. The floors were stone, yes, but they were covered partly by a woven rug in dark red and amber, worn soft with years of use. There were boots by the door, 3 pairs of small ones and 1 large pair, the large pair mud-stained along the sole. Lena stood just inside the entrance and dripped quietly onto the stone floor. The man who had led her here, Cale Draven, handed his lantern to a man who appeared from a side corridor. A quiet, older man who bowed his head and disappeared again without speaking. Then Cale turned and looked at Lena, the way a person looks at a problem they have not yet decided how to solve. "You are making a puddle," he said. "I am aware," she said. He called over his shoulder, and the quiet man reappeared. Cale spoke to him in a low voice. The man looked at Lena, nodded, and disappeared again. A few minutes later he came back with a folded towel and a dry blanket. Lena took them and said thank you, because whatever her situation was, she was not going to stop having manners. She dried her face and her arms and squeezed the water from the ends of her hair as best she could. The blanket went around her shoulders, and she was immediately, incredibly grateful for it. She had not realized how cold she had become until the warmth started to reach her. Cale watched this without comment. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward a plain wooden bench near the fire. She sat. The heat from the hearth reached her immediately, and she had to resist the urge to simply lean forward and put her hands directly into it. She pressed her palms together in her lap instead, and looked at the fire, and tried to remember what it felt like to be dry. He sat across from her, not on the bench but on a low chair that was angled slightly toward the fire. He had taken off the long coat and draped it over the arm of the chair. Underneath it he was wearing plain dark clothing, which surprised her. She had expected something more formal, something that announced his position more clearly. He looked like someone who had been working, rather than someone who had been ruling, and she was not sure what to make of that. "Your name," he said. "Lena," she said, and then, because she had been raised to give her full name when asked, "Lena Graves." He did not respond to that. He looked at her without expression, the way a person looks at something when they are trying to decide what category it falls into. "What pack?" he said. She hesitated for only a second. "Greywood. Until tonight." "Until tonight," he repeated. "Until tonight," she said again, firmly. He did not ask her to explain. She appreciated that, more than she would have expected. She had been bracing for the question, the natural follow-up, "And what happened tonight that made you leave your pack and wander into foreign territory, alone in the rain without a coat?" She had been preparing her answer, the short version that gave the facts, without the feeling, the version that was true but not raw. He did not ask. He simply nodded once, as if "until tonight" was a complete and sufficient answer, which she supposed it was. "You are a healer?" he said. She glanced down at herself, wondering what had given that away, then realized she had left her bag open slightly, and the small first aid kit was visible. "Healer's assistant," she said. 3 years. He looked at her for a moment longer, then he stood. "There is a room," he said. "You can stay tonight. In the morning, we will discuss what happens next." She blinked. She had not expected that. She had expected to be escorted back to the border, possibly with a formal reprimand attached. She had been preparing herself for the cold walk back through the rain, to the edge of his territory, and then the longer, wetter walk to anywhere else. "Why?" she said. He looked at her, as if the question was unusual. "Because you are cold and wet, and it is the middle of the night," he said. "I crossed your border illegally," she said. "I noticed. You do not have to offer me a room." He looked at her steadily. "I am aware of what I have to do, and what I do not have to do," he said. "I am offering you a room. You may decline it if you prefer to continue standing in my entrance hall being wet, but I would find that inconvenient." She stared at him. He did not smile. He just waited. "Thank you," she said finally. "I will take the room." He called the quiet man again, whose name turned out to be Owen. Owen led her up a wide staircase and down a corridor lined with dark wood paneling, and opened a door to a room that was simple and clean, and had a bed with actual blankets on it, and a small fire already going in the corner, as if someone had anticipated she might need it. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. "There is a washroom," Owen said, gesturing to a door on the left, "and dry clothing in the drawer there. It may not fit well, but it is dry." "It will be fine," she said. "Thank you." Owen nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind him. Lena stood alone in the room. She looked at the bed, she looked at the fire, she looked at the closed door behind her, and then at the window, which showed nothing but dark and rain. She sat down on the edge of the bed very carefully, as if she were not entirely sure it was real, and was worried that pressing on it too hard would prove that. The blankets were soft. The mattress gave slightly under her weight. The fire made a small, comfortable sound. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry again. She had already cried, and she had decided that was all the crying she was going to do tonight. But she sat there for a long time, with her face in her hands, just breathing, just being still, just letting herself understand that for this one night at least, she was not cold, she was not walking, she was not alone in the dark. She changed into the dry clothing from the drawer. It was too large, clearly belonging to someone taller, but it was soft and warm, and she pulled it on gratefully, and climbed into the bed, and lay there looking at the ceiling, until her eyes closed, without her deciding to let them. She did not dream. She was too tired for that. She just slept, deeply and completely, in a way she had not slept in months, and the rain fell outside, and the fire burned low in the corner, and the northern palace was quiet around her. She woke to a sound she did not immediately understand. It was a high, thin sound, somewhere between a wail and a word, coming from somewhere down the corridor. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, because 3 years of working in a healer's building had trained her body to respond to distress sounds before her mind caught up. She opened the door and looked out into the corridor. The sound came again, closer now, and she identified it. A child. A very young child. She moved toward it without thinking. There were 3 doors between hers and the source of the sound. The third was slightly open, and through the gap, she could see a faint light, a small lamp on a low table. She pushed the door open gently. The room was a child's room. There were toys on a shelf along one wall, a small wooden horse, and a row of painted blocks. There was a rug on the floor, with a pattern of animals on it, worn soft and faded. There was a small bed, and in the small bed was a child, sitting upright and crying with the total, uncomplicated grief of someone who has woken from a bad dream and does not yet understand that it was only a dream. He was very small. She guessed he was 5 years old, perhaps 4. He had dark hair that was tangled from sleep, and his cheeks were wet, and he was not looking at anything in particular, just sitting there crying, in the way children do when they have been crying long enough that they have lost track of why. Lena did not call out or knock or announce herself. She simply walked into the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside him. He startled and looked at her. His crying paused, surprised out of him by the appearance of a stranger. "Hello?" Lena said quietly. He stared at her. "Bad dream," she said. After a moment he nodded. "Those are the worst," she said. "I had one recently too." He looked at her with the serious, searching gaze of a small child, deciding whether to trust someone. She waited, not moving, not reaching for him, just sitting there, so he could see she was not a threat. "You smell like rain," he said. "I walked in the rain tonight," she said. "I am still a little bit wet probably." He considered this. Then he said, "I am Ren." "I am Lena," she said. "Are you a ghost?" he said. She blinked. "No," she said. "I am a person. I am staying here tonight." He seemed to accept this. He looked at his blanket, and then at the wall, and then at her again. "I dreamed about the thing under the floor," he said. "It pulls at your feet." "Things under floors are not real," she said, "but they feel real in dreams. That is what makes them so frightening." He nodded seriously. Then he lay down, slowly, the way children do when they are not quite sure they want to stop being upright. Lena reached out and pulled the blanket up around his shoulders without thinking. It was such an automatic gesture that she did it before she realized she had no right to be in this room, tucking in a child who belonged to a man she had just met. But Ren did not seem bothered by it. He looked up at her from the pillow with his serious dark eyes. "Will you stay?" he said. "Until I am asleep?" She looked at him. "Yes," she said. She sat on the edge of his bed, and she stayed until his breathing slowed and deepened, and his face relaxed into sleep. It took about 7 minutes, she counted, because that was something she did, measuring small stretches of time in situations where she was uncertain what else to measure. When she was sure he was sleeping, she stood and moved toward the door. She nearly walked into the person standing in the doorway. Cale Draven was standing just outside the door looking in. He was not dressed for bed, which meant he had either not yet slept or had already woken. His expression was the same one he had been wearing since she met him. Still, unreadable, giving almost nothing away. But he was looking at the sleeping child in the bed, and something in his jaw was very slightly less set than it had been before. He looked at Lena. She looked at him. They were standing very close, because the doorway was narrow, and she had not expected him to be there. She took a small step back. "He woke up," she said, keeping her voice low. "He often does," Cale said. His voice was quiet, matching hers. "Bad dreams," she said. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment. His face gave her nothing to work with. He looked at her in the way of a man who is perpetually keeping something at a distance, including his own thoughts. She had seen that look before, in patients sometimes, the ones who had been hurt badly enough that they had started treating pain as a thing to be managed rather than felt. "He is asleep now," she said. "I can see that," he said. She moved past him into the corridor. He stepped aside to let her, which required him to press himself against the door frame, because the corridor was also not wide. She was very aware of how close that was, for no reason she wanted to examine. She walked back toward her room. She heard the door to Ren's room close softly behind her. She climbed back into bed. She lay there looking at the ceiling. In the morning, she told herself, she would make a plan. She would thank the Alpha King for his hospitality, and she would find out which direction was best to walk, and she would leave. She would not think about the child in the room down the hall, or the way his face had looked when it relaxed into sleep, or the fact that there had been nobody there to comfort him when he woke, until she had appeared. She would not think about any of that. She closed her eyes. Downstairs, in a study that faced the dark garden, Cale Draven sat in a chair behind a desk, covered in papers, and looked at nothing in particular. Owen had told him, earlier, about the woman at the border. The scouts had seen her crossing before the rain got heavy, and Owen had said, quietly, "She seems lost, sir." Just lost, and Cale had gone himself because he went himself for border matters, always, and he had found her sitting against a tree in the rain with a blanket that was doing nothing for her, and her face had been so completely composed, in the middle of all that misery, that it had surprised him. He had not been surprised by someone in a long time. He thought about Ren, sleeping now, the nightmare past. Ren had been waking like that for almost a year. Sometimes Eli, who was 7, would go to him. Sometimes Owen would check. Cale went himself when he was awake, which he often was because he slept badly, and had for a long time, but he was not good at it, at sitting with a frightened child, at saying the right thing, at being soft enough. He knew this about himself. He had never been good at soft. The woman, Lena Graves, had done it without being asked. She had simply appeared and sat down, and been exactly what Ren needed, and had not made a single thing of it. He picked up a pen, and then set it down again. In the morning, he had told her, they would discuss what happened next. He had not yet decided what that meant. But he was beginning to think that sending her back to the border in the morning might not be, actually, the most sensible option. He thought about that for a while. Then he went back to his papers, and the study was quiet, and the rain outside the windows finally slowed to a soft, steady sound, like the house breathing. The palace beyond his study window was quiet and dark, but somewhere inside it, in a room she had not been meant to find, a woman he had just met was sleeping, and for the first time in a very long while, that particular corridor of the building did not feel entirely empty. He did not know what to do with that, so he picked up the pen again and did not think about it, which was the thing he was best at, not thinking about things he did not know what to do with. Outside, the last of the rain tapped quietly against the glass and faded into nothing. Morning was still hours away, but when it came, he had already decided. He was not going to ask her to leave immediately. He was going to ask her a question first, and he was going to pay careful attention to the answer. Breakfast in the Northern Palace was not a quiet event. Lena discovered this at 7 in the morning when she came downstairs, following the smell of something warm and the sound of what she first thought was an argument, but turned out to be two children explaining their competing opinions about whether a particular wooden horse belonged to whom. The kitchen was large and practical, and nothing at all like a room in a palace, which was the first thing she appreciated about it. There was a long table in the center, and at the table were two boys. The one she already knew was Ren, sitting on his knees on a wooden chair, because he was not quite tall enough to reach the table properly otherwise. He saw her immediately and stopped mid-sentence and stared. The other boy was older and taller, with the same dark hair, and a face that was currently set in the expression of someone who has just made an argument he was confident in and was not prepared to abandon it. He looked at Lena when Ren stared at her, and his expression shifted immediately from certain to cautious. "You are the Rain Lady," Ren said. "I am," Lena said. "I told Eli about you," Ren said. "He did not believe me." The older boy, Eli, looked at his brother. "I said I was not sure," he said with careful precision. "That is different from not believing." "It is not that different," Ren said. Owen, who was at the stove doing something with a large pot, turned and looked at Lena. "Good morning, Miss Graves. Sit wherever you like." She sat at the end of the table, leaving space between herself and the boys. Eli watched her with the alert, measuring gaze of a child who has decided to gather information before forming an opinion. He was 7, she remembered. He had a thin scar along his left jawline that she noticed and did not comment on. Ren pointed at her the moment she sat down. "She sat with me," he told Eli, "when I had the nightmare." "I know," Eli said. "You already told me that." "She did not go away," Ren said. "She stayed until I was asleep." "I know," Eli said again, but he was looking at Lena when he said it, and his expression had shifted slightly from cautious to something she could not quite name. Owen brought plates. There was bread, thick cut, with a dark crust, and a dish of soft cheese, and sliced fruit, and something hot in a small pot that turned out to be a kind of savory porridge. Lena ate slowly, because she was genuinely hungry, and because eating gave her something to do with her hands while the boys orbited around her. Ren, she learned within the first 10 minutes, did not actually need much encouragement to talk. He talked about the dream, and about the wooden horse, and about a dog that had belonged to the palace once and had gone away, which he described with a level of detail and emotion that suggested the dog had been extremely important to him. He talked about what he wanted for his upcoming birthday, which was still 3 months away, but already had a detailed list attached to it. Eli was quieter. He listened to his brother with an expression of long patience and asked Lena 2 direct questions. Where had she come from, and did she know how to do anything useful? She was startled enough by the second question that she laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, and it felt strange in her chest, like using a muscle she had forgotten. "Yes," she said. "I am a healer's assistant. I know first aid and basic wound care, and how to identify fever, and how to mix certain medicines. I also know how to cook, how to keep records, and how to talk to people who are frightened." Eli considered this. "That is useful," he said. "I thought so," she said. Ren leaned across the table and said, with enormous seriousness, "Can you fix a wooden horse? The leg is loose." "Probably," she said. I would need some string, or a small nail. Ren looked at Eli with an expression of complete vindication. Eli looked at the ceiling. There was a sound from the doorway, and both boys straightened slightly, which told Lena everything she needed to know before she turned around. Cale Draven stood in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed for the day now, more formally than he had been the night before, and he looked like what he was, a man who was accustomed to authority, and wore it without effort or announcement. He looked at the boys and then at Lena, and then at the table. "Good morning," Lena said. "Good morning," he said, in a tone that did not commit to whether it was or not. He sat down across from her, and Owen appeared immediately with a cup and the hot pot. Cale poured his own cup without looking at it, which was the habit of someone who had done the same thing at the same table every morning for years, and did not need to watch his own hands. Ren immediately told him about the wooden horse. Cale said, "Yes, you mentioned it yesterday." "Lena can fix it," Ren said. Cale looked at Lena. She shrugged. With the right materials, probably yes. Eli was watching his father with the careful attention of a child who is very good at reading adult expressions. He said nothing, but Lena noticed that he had positioned himself slightly toward her side of the table, which she thought was probably unconscious. Cale drank his coffee. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Lena. "Come to the study when you are finished," he said. "We have things to discuss." She nodded. The boys looked between them with a sudden, intense interest that they both tried to hide and both failed at. Ren put his elbow on the table and his chin in his hand and watched his father with transparent curiosity. Eli pretended to be focused on his bread. Cale stood. He looked at both boys and said, "Eat your breakfast," in the tone of a man who had said that exact sentence many hundreds of times. Then he walked out. Ren turned immediately to Lena. "Are you in trouble?" he said. "I hope not," she said. "You do not look like you are in trouble," he said, with the confident diagnostic ability of a 5-year-old. "Good," she said. Eli said, "If you are going to stay, I should like you to know that Ren is afraid of drains in the floor, so please do not mention drains." Ren made an outraged noise. "I am not afraid of them. I am cautious of them." "You will not walk over the one in the courtyard," Eli said, and his voice was absolutely without cruelty, just stating fact. "It is a large drain," Ren said. Lena bit the inside of her cheek to keep her face straight. She looked at Eli. "Noted," she said. "No drain discussion." Eli gave her a small, precise nod, as if they had just signed an agreement. She finished her breakfast, thanked Owen, and went to find the study. It was not hard to find. The palace was large but straightforward in its layout, and she followed the corridor she remembered from the night before and found the study door open. Cale was standing when she arrived, not behind the desk but at the window, looking at the garden outside. The morning had come in gray and damp, the aftermath of the rain. The garden looked wet and patient, the way things do after a storm. She stood in the doorway. "You wanted to see me." He turned from the window. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. She sat. He sat behind the desk. He did not have papers in front of him this time, which meant this was not an administrative conversation. He looked at her with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had thought carefully about what they wanted to say and was going to say it without decoration. "You have nowhere to go," he said. It was not a question, but it was not unkind either. It was simply a fact he was stating, so they could proceed from the same starting point. "Not immediately," she said. "I have options. They require travel." "How far?" "Several territories." He nodded. "You would travel alone." "I would." He looked at her steadily. "You crossed into my territory last night unescorted, in the dark, in a storm, without appropriate clothing or footgear. You have a small bag, a first aid kit, and inadequate shoes." She looked at her feet briefly. She had put back on the shoes from last night, which were mostly dry now but still slightly stiff. They were not travel shoes. They were the shoes she had worn to a ceremony she had not expected to be leaving alone. "That is accurate," she said. "Then your options are less practical than you are presenting them," he said. She looked at him. "What are you suggesting?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the desk, then at her. "I have 3 sons," he said. "I noticed," she said. "The youngest is 9 months old, He is with the nurse right now. He does not sleep well. He paused. None of them sleep well. She said nothing, waiting. The older two, he said, have had 3 different caregivers in the past year. The first left because the position was too demanding. The second did not get along with Eli. The third was offered a better position elsewhere and took it. He said this without bitterness, just fact. Owen manages the house. He is not young, and he has too many other responsibilities. Lena was beginning to understand where this was going. She stayed very still and let him get there himself. I am proposing an arrangement, Cale said. You would stay here. You would serve as caregiver to my sons. In return, you would have a room, meals, safety, and a wage. You would not be a servant. You would not be staff. You would be in a position of care over the boys. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. You are asking me, she said, because you watched me sit with Ren last night. In part, he said. And because I have nowhere else to go, which means I am unlikely to leave quickly, she said. Something moved across his face. Not quite approval, but close. You are direct, he said. I find it saves time, she said. He waited. She thought about it. She thought about what she was being offered and what she was not being offered, which was important to understand clearly. She was being offered shelter and safety and work and a wage. She was not being offered warmth or welcome or a place in this family. She was being offered a practical arrangement by a practical man who had a problem she happened to be in a position to help with. She thought about 3 children, 2 of whom she had already met, and 1 of whom she had not, and the way Ren had said, "Will you stay until I am asleep?" She thought about the healer's keys on the front step in Greywood. I have conditions, she said. He looked at her. The children come first, she said. Not the house schedule, not the political calendar, not whoever is visiting. When a child needs me, I go. No argument about it. Agreed, he said, without hesitation. I work with Owen on anything medical. I am a healer's assistant, and I take that seriously. If someone in this house is ill or injured, I am involved. Agreed. And I need to know I can leave, she said. If the arrangement stops working, for either of us, I need to know there is no obligation holding me here. No contract I cannot exit. No border restriction because I am living on your land. He was quiet for a moment. You will be a guest of the palace, he said. That carries its own protections. Then you agree. I agree. She nodded once. Then I will stay, she said. He nodded back. No smile, no warmth, no handshake, just an acknowledgement, clean and complete. She stood. He stood. Owen will show you where things are, he said. You should meet Cale today. He is with Nurse Polly in the East Wing. She moved toward the door. At the doorway she stopped. Why did you go to the border yourself last night? She said. Owen mentioned you often do. Most Alpha Kings send scouts. He looked at her. His face gave her nothing. Because if I send someone else, and they make a wrong decision, someone gets hurt, he said. I prefer to make my own wrong decisions. She looked at him for a moment. That is either very responsible or very lonely, she said. She did not wait for him to respond. She walked back into the corridor and left him standing in his study, and she was certain, without being able to prove it, that something in his expression had shifted in the half-second before she turned away. Not much. Just enough for her to notice, and to file away, and to think about later when she was not in the same room as him. She found Owen in the kitchen and asked him to show her around. Owen was delighted by this, in the quiet way of someone who does not show delight loudly. He walked her through every corridor and room and cupboard with the pride of someone who has maintained a place carefully and is glad to have someone notice. She met Cale in the East Wing. Nurse Polly was a round-faced older woman with efficient hands and tired eyes, the specific tiredness of someone who has been handling a baby who does not sleep with full dedication for 9 months, and is doing it without complaint but not without cost. She looked at Lena with a kind of hope that she was clearly trying not to show. Cale was 9 months old and very small and very awake. He was lying on a blanket on the floor looking at the ceiling, with the intense concentration of a baby who has just discovered that ceilings exist. When Lena crouched down near him, he turned his head and looked at her. She had spent time with babies in the healer's building. She was comfortable with them in the way of someone who knows that they are simply small people, with limited vocabulary and enormous feelings. "Hello, Cale," she said softly. He looked at her. Then, without any apparent reason, he reached up one small hand in her direction. She gave him her finger. He grabbed it with the complete certainty of a baby who has never questioned whether things offered to them will stay. She crouched there on the floor beside him, letting him hold her finger, and she thought, "This is what I am staying for. Not the room, or the wage, or the safety, though all of those matter. She was staying for this. For the small hand holding on." Polly was watching her. "He does not usually take to people quickly," she said, and her voice was careful, like she was trying not to be hopeful too fast. "He will be fine," Lena said, without knowing yet if that was true, but meaning it enough that it came out steady. Polly let out a long breath. And Lena sat on the floor of the east wing of the northern palace and let a 9-month-old boy hold her finger. And outside the window the wet garden was brightening slightly as the clouds began to part. And somewhere in the house above her, a 5-year-old boy with a loose-legged wooden horse was probably telling his brother about her for the 4th time that morning. She realized, not going anywhere after all. She had expected the arrangement to feel temporary. She had expected to wake every morning in the room they had given her and feel the hovering quality of a thing that has not yet decided what it is. She had expected to eat meals in this house the way one eats in a place where one is not yet sure one belongs, carefully, attentively, watching for the signal that things are about to change. Instead, by the end of the 3rd day, Ren had moved her to the top of a very specific hierarchy he kept in his head, somewhere above Owen and below the wooden horse, which he spoke about with a reverence that bordered on religious. By the end of the 4th day, Eli had asked her a question about wound care that revealed he had been reading medical texts from the palace library and wanted someone to tell him if he had understood them correctly. By the end of the 1st week, Cale had begun watching the door of whatever room he was in, with a focused attention whenever she left it, and would settle almost immediately when she returned. And she, who had expected to feel temporary, felt something else entirely, something quieter and more dangerous, something that felt uncomfortably like beginning. She did not examine it too closely. There was plenty of other things to think about. The first time Lena understood that this house was not simply cold by architecture, that it was cold because something had gone out of it the way light goes out, was the evening she found Eli sitting alone in the long gallery on the upper floor, with an open book in his lap that he was not reading. She had come up looking for a spare blanket from the linen cupboard at the end of the hall, and had seen him through the open doorway. He was 7 years old, and he was sitting very straight in a chair that was slightly too large for him, and he was looking at the window with the expression of a person who is trying to think about nothing, which is something adults do, and children should not have to practice. She stopped in the doorway. She did not say anything immediately. After a moment he looked over and saw her, and his expression shifted back to his regular one, the careful, composed one he wore the way some children wear their best clothes, properly, consciously, with effort. "I am reading," he said. "I can see that," she said. "The book is upside down." He looked down. The book was, in fact, upside down. He turned it over without comment, but a flush came into his face that he could not control, and she felt the particular tenderness that comes from watching a child try very hard to seem fine. She came into the gallery and sat down in the chair beside his, not across from him, beside him. She looked at the window too. "What are you thinking about?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing is very hard to think about," she said. "Your brain keeps filling it up with something." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the evening was arriving, the sky turning from pale gray to deeper gray, the kind of autumn evening that feels like it is leaning towards something. "Today is her birthday," he said. He said it the way he said most things, without inflection, stating fact. She would have been 31. Lena did not ask who. She already knew. The boy's mother. Cale's wife, who had died when Cale was not yet born, and Ren was 4, and Eli was 6, who had died in a way that the palace did not discuss openly, which was itself a kind of information. "What was she like?" Lena said. He looked at the window. He was deciding something. She waited. "She used to bring things from outside," he said. "Leaves and stones and things like that. She put them on the kitchen windowsill. Owen used to move them because they took up space, and she would always put them back." A pause. "She sang badly. She knew she sang badly, and she did it anyway. Ren does not remember that. I remember. Lena looked at the window. It sounds like she was someone who believed that small beautiful things mattered, she said. Eli looked at her. Yes, he said, as if she had correctly solved a difficult problem. That is exactly what she was like. That is not a small thing to be, Lena said. He nodded. He looked back at the window. After a while he said, Father does not talk about her. Some people find that easier, Lena said carefully. I know, he said. I am not complaining about it. I understand why. He paused. But sometimes, I want to say her name, and have someone say it back. Lena looked at him. He was staring at the window with his careful face set carefully in place, and she thought, this child is doing an enormous amount of work, and nobody is helping him carry it. Her name was Claire, she said quietly. It was the name she had heard Owen say once, just once, in a moment when he had not known she was close enough to hear. Eli stilled. He looked at her. Claire, he said. He said it the way you say a word when you are checking whether it still means the same thing it used to. Then he let out a breath that was not quite a sigh, something quieter. Yes, he said. She sat with him until the light outside had gone fully, and the gallery had grown dark around them, and Owen called from downstairs that supper was ready. Eli stood and tucked the book under his arm and walked to the door. At the door he stopped. Thank you, he said. You are welcome, she said. He walked out. She sat in the dark gallery for another minute, looking at the window, thinking about what it costs a child to be 7 years old and spend their energy on being composed. Cale did not know she had been in the gallery with Eli. Or if he did not mention it. They saw each other at meals and sometimes in the corridors, brief intersections where he would ask something practical about the boys' routines, or she would relay something one of them had needed or done. He was not unfriendly. He was also not warm. He was exactly the person he had been when she arrived, a man who was keeping himself at a careful remove from everything that might cost him something. She learned things about him gradually, the way you learn things about a place you are living in, through small observations, and Owen's occasional quietly offered pieces of information. She learned that he had not taken a meal alone since his wife died. He always ate with the boys, even when he had work to do, even when there were things that could clearly have used his attention that evening. She learned this was not a habit he had started after losing Claire. She learned it was one he had kept because Claire had started it, had said very early in their marriage that meals were not for efficiency but for being present, and he had not been able to let go of that even when he had let go of so many other things. She learned that he went to the old wing of the palace, the part that was officially unused, on the anniversaries of certain dates. Owen had told her not to follow him when she saw him walking that direction one evening, and she had not, but she had seen his face when he came back, and it was the face of someone who goes to a place because they cannot stay away from it, not because it helps them. She learned that he had not slept more than 4 hours in a row since his wife's death, and possibly before it, that he worked late into the night in his study, and was up before anyone else in the morning, and that Owen left a cup of coffee outside his study door every night at 11, and it was always empty by midnight. She also learned, in the second week of her time there, about the letters. She found them not intentionally. She was in the study looking for a particular record Owen had mentioned, something about the boys' previous medical notes that she wanted to review, and she had opened the wrong drawer and found a stack of envelopes, not old ones but recent ones, 4 or 5 months old at most, sealed, addressed in the same handwriting, and she had not read them but she had seen the name on the return address before she pushed the drawer shut. The name was Cole. The pack name was Greywood. She stood for a moment with the drawer closed and her hand on the handle, and she thought about what that meant, and what she was not sure it meant, and what questions she could ask and could not ask, and decided to ask none of them. Not yet. What she knew was this. Marcus Cole, who had rejected her in front of her entire pack 11 days ago, had been writing letters to the Alpha King of the Northern Realm. That was either coincidence or something else entirely. She was not naive enough to believe it was coincidence. She went back to looking for the medical records and found them in the correct drawer, and carried them to the kitchen table, and spread them out, and read through them with the focused attention she had trained herself into over 3 years of healer's work. The records told their own story, a quiet one. Ren had been prone to ear infections as a younger child, Eli had broken his left arm at age 5, and the setting had been done neatly. Cale's birth records were there, clinical and brief, and the line that noted the mother had not survived was written in the same small plain handwriting as everything else, as if it were simply one fact among many, which she supposed from a record-keeping perspective it was, but it still made her stop and put down the paper and breathe for a moment. She put the records in order, made notes of what she wanted to discuss with Owen, and was folding everything carefully when Cale walked into the kitchen. He stopped when he saw her. "Medical records," she said, because his eyes had gone to the papers on the table. "I can see that," he said, and she noticed that he very briefly did not look directly at the top of the stack, which had Cale's birth record on it. "I wanted to understand their history," she said. "Health patterns, previous injuries, anything useful." He came and poured himself a glass of water from the pitcher on the counter. He looked out the window, rather than at her. "Owen was supposed to give those to you," he said. "He forgot," she said. "It does not matter. I found them." He was quiet. Then he said, without turning from the window, "Cale does not sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. Not since birth. Polly has tried everything. He settles better for me than for anyone else, but I cannot be in there all night." "I know," she said. "I have been in with him twice this week. He settles for me too." He turned from the window and looked at her then. It was the direct look, the one that gave nothing away, but she was getting better at reading the edges of it, the things it held by not showing. "You did not tell me that," he said. "You did not ask," she said. "And I did not think you would want to report on every small thing. I thought you would want to know if something was wrong." "Is something wrong?" "No," she said. "Cale is fine. He just needs more time and more patience, and less being handed between people. He needs to know who is coming when he cries." He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the window. "Yes," he said quietly. She gathered the papers and stood. She was moving toward the door when he said, still not looking at her, "How is Eli?" She paused. "He is reading medical texts from the library," she said. "He wants to understand things. He does not like not understanding things." "That is accurate. He is also carrying more than a 7-year-old should," she said carefully. "He works very hard at being all right." A silence. "I know," Cale said. His voice was low. "I am aware." "Are you doing anything about it?" she said, not unkindly but directly, because being indirect about a child's pain seemed wasteful. He looked at her. His jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger, she thought, in something more complicated. "I am working on it," he said. "All right," she said. She left the kitchen. She did not push further, because pushing further was not her place. Not yet, and possibly not ever. But she went to sleep that night thinking about a boy who kept a book upside down so no one would know he was not reading, and a man who kept letters in a drawer from the pack that had just discarded her, and a house that was full of people carefully not saying the most important things. She was thinking very carefully about that drawer, and she had decided, by the time morning came, that she was going to find out what Marcus Cole wanted from the Alpha King of the Northern Realm. Not because she was afraid, though a small part of her was, but because in the 11 days she had been in this house, she had already started to care about what happened inside it, and that meant she needed to understand everything that was pushing against it from outside. She rose early, before anyone else, and stood at her window looking at the garden as it came slowly into light. She had arrived here with nothing. She was still leaving every morning, with very little in the practical sense. But something was changing, slowly, in the way that things change when they are not being forced, just allowed. She was not leaving, and she was going to need to figure out what that meant. The morning routine settled into her bones faster than she expected. She had not thought of herself as someone who took to routines quickly, but here she was, 2 weeks in, and she already knew that Ren needed his porridge warm but not hot, that Eli always read for exactly 15 minutes before coming down for breakfast, that Cale's first sound after waking was not a cry, but a small questioning noise, like a question mark made of breath, as if he were checking whether the world was still there. She knew that Owen made too much coffee every morning and left the extra on the stove for whoever walked past it. She knew that the second step on the main staircase creaked, and that Cale, going up to bed after midnight, always skipped it. Not from habit but deliberately, because he did not want to wake anyone. She had learned this because she was sometimes awake at that hour herself, and she had heard the careful skip of it several times before she understood what it was. She knew that on Tuesday evenings, Cale held formal meetings in the East Receiving Room with representatives from the surrounding territories, and that he was different in those meetings, not colder exactly, but less of the particular tiredness that lived around him in private. In formal settings he became purely the Alpha King, and purely the Alpha King was formidable in a way that she had only glimpsed in pieces before. She knew these things the way you know the things that matter, not because you memorized them, but because you were paying attention when they happened. And she had decided, standing at her window in the early light, that paying attention was going to be her greatest asset in understanding whatever Marcus Cole wanted, and in deciding what, if anything, she was going to do about it. She went downstairs. She put the kettle on. She listened to the house wake up around her, one small sound at a time, and she waited. That morning, something happened that made the waiting stop. Owen came into the kitchen with the particular expression he wore when something required handling, a tightened quality around his eyes, and a too careful steadiness to his movements. He set a folded envelope on the table in front of her. On the front of it, in handwriting she recognized immediately, was her name. She looked at it for a long moment without touching it. "It came with the morning courier," Owen said. "Addressed here. To you by name." She picked it up. The seal on the back was the Greywood mark. She had seen it on 100 official documents during her 3 years there. Owen left the kitchen without being asked. That was the kind of man he was. She opened the letter. She read it. She read it a second time, more slowly. Then she put it face down on the table and looked at the window and thought about what it said, which was this: that Marcus Cole, newly confirmed beta of Greywood Pack, was formally requesting that Lena Graves return to the Greywood territory, as she had left, without completing several administrative procedures that required her signature. The language was formal and dry and entirely impersonal. It did not say please, it did not say sorry. It said required, and procedures, and formal request, as if she were a document that had been misfiled. At the bottom, in a different ink, slightly less formal, were 4 words that were not part of the official language. "It is not finished, Lena." She read those 4 words 3 more times. Then she turned the letter face down again and sat very still. She was still sitting like that when Cale walked into the kitchen. Cale looked at the letter on the table, and then at Lena, and then at the letter again, and she could see him decide not to ask about it, which was the same decision she would have made in his position, so she respected it. She turned the letter over before he could see the seal, which he had probably already seen, and put it in the pocket of her apron. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. He poured coffee. She got up and put plates on the table. The ordinary machinery of morning moved around them, and the letter stayed in her pocket, pressing against her hip like a small weight. Wren came down the stairs 2 at a time, which he was not supposed to do, and Owen called after him about it from the landing, and Eli came behind him at a precise and dignified pace that made the contrast between them almost funny. Cale was being brought down by Polly, who looked like she had been awake for most of the night, and Lena took him immediately, and Polly gave her a grateful look and sat down heavily in a chair and accepted coffee from Owen with both hands. Breakfast was loud, as it always was. Wren had questions about what birds ate in winter. Eli had a correction about something Wren had said the day before that he had been waiting to deliver at the right moment. Cale wanted to grab everything within reach and put it in his mouth, which was a significant project given how much there was within reach. Cale sat at the head of the table and watched his sons, and sometimes answered their questions, and sometimes let them answer each other, and Lena sat beside Cale's small chair, and made sure nothing dangerous reached his hands, and listened to all of it, and felt, despite the letter in her pocket, something that was very close to ease. After breakfast, after the boys had been redirected toward their morning activities, Owen came to find her. "There was a man at the gate this morning," he said. He kept his voice low, which meant this was not casual information. "Before the courier. He did not come in. He stood outside the gate for a while and then left." She went still. "What did he look like?" Owen gave her a description that she recognized before he finished it. She said thank you, and went to the window in the front sitting room that overlooked the gate, and stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty road. Marcus had not sent only a letter. He had come himself. He had stood outside the gate of the Northern Palace, and he had not come in, which meant he had thought about it, and decided not to, which meant he was not yet willing to make it a direct confrontation. He was testing. He was seeing what she would do, whether the letter would be enough to move her, whether she would appear at the gate herself, whether she was the same person who had walked out of Greywood without a fight. She was not. She had not been, actually, even when she left. She had been heartbroken, and she had been exhausted, but she had not been someone who folded. She had simply chosen not to fight in a place that had already made its decision about her. There was a difference. She went to find Cale. He was in the study. The door was open. He was reading something, and she knocked on the frame and he looked up. "I need to tell you something," she said. He set the paper down. He waited. She came in and sat, because she was not going to have this conversation standing in a doorway. She told him about Marcus. She told him about the rejection, briefly, and without the feeling, just the facts, the ceremony, the withdrawal, the public nature of it. She told him about leaving. She told him about the letters she had found in the drawer, which she acknowledged directly, and did not apologize for noticing. She told him about the letter that had arrived that morning, and about the man at the gate. He listened to all of it without interrupting. His expression went through nothing she could identify. He was very still, in the way that powerful people are sometimes still, the kind of stillness that is not peace but control. When she finished, she waited. "The letters in the drawer," he said. "I saw the name only," she said. "I did not read them." He was quiet. He looked at the desk. Cole has been attempting to formalize a trade agreement between Greywood and the Northern Territory, he said. He wanted formal recognition of his new status as Beta, standard political correspondence. "Is that all it was?" she said. He looked at her directly. "Yes," he said. "I had not yet replied. The requests were recent, and I had not prioritized them." She believed him. She was not sure why she believed him as quickly as she did, but she did. "He came to the gate this morning," she said. "He did not come in." "I know," Cale said. "My scouts reported it." She had expected that. "What do you want to do?" she said. He looked at her. "What do you want to do?" he said. She was slightly surprised by the question. She had expected him to tell her, to make a decision, in the way he seemed to make most decisions, clearly, and without much ceremony. "I do not want to go back to Greywood," she said. "I did not leave incorrectly. I left because there was nothing there for me anymore. If Marcus wants my signature on administrative forms, he can mail them through proper channels. And the rest of it?" he said. The 4 words at the bottom. She had not told him about those. She looked at him. "Owen told me about the letter before I came in this morning," he said. He did not read it. He noted the seal. She exhaled slightly. "It is not finished, Lena," she said, quoting it back. "That is what it says." He was quiet. "What does he want?" Cale said. His voice was the same as always, but there was something under it, a sharpness she had not heard before. "I think," she said carefully, "that he wants me to know he has not decided I am unimportant, simply because he was the one who left." She looked at the window. "Some people cannot bear it when the person they dismissed turns out to be fine." Cale said nothing. "I am going to be fine," she said. It was not a question. She said it to the window, and to herself, and perhaps also to the man sitting across from her, as a statement of intent. "I know you are," he said. She looked at him. It was a small thing. 3 words, said plainly and without ceremony. But he said it the way he said most things, like a fact he had already established, and did not see the point in dressing up. Something loosened slightly in her chest. She stood. "I will write a formal reply to the administrative request," she said, "through proper channels. If he comes to the gate again, I would like Owen to be told immediately." "He already has instructions," Cale said. She nodded. She moved to the door. "Lena," he said. She stopped. "You have been here less than 3 weeks," he said. "You do not have to manage this alone." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the desk, not at her, in the way he had of saying things, while appearing to be focused on something else, as if looking directly at what he was saying cost him something. "I know," she said. She left the study. She went to Eli's room first, and knocked, and was told to come in. Eli was sitting at his small desk with the medical text he had been working through, and he looked up with his usual careful expression. "I want to teach you something," she said, "if you are interested." He set the book aside immediately, which told her the answer. She spent the next 2 hours teaching him basic pressure application for minor wounds and the correct way to clean a cut before bandaging it, using a practice kit she had assembled from the healer's supplies Owen had let her set up in a small room off the kitchen. Eli was an excellent student, attentive and precise, and not at all squeamish, which she had suspected based on the texts he had been choosing. He asked better questions than most adults she had worked with. He did not pretend to understand something when he did not. At the end, he cleaned and repacked the kit with the same care she had shown him. "Why do you know all this?" he said. "I spent 3 years working with a healer," she said. "Before that, I learned basic care, because when I was young, there was not always someone nearby who could help, so I had to help myself." He looked at her. "That sounds lonely," he said. "It was sometimes," she said honestly, "but it also made me useful, which I found I liked better than being helpless." He nodded. He thought about this in the concentrated way he thought about everything. "I think I would prefer useful too," he said. "I know," she said. She was closing the kit when he said, not looking at her, "Is someone giving you trouble?" She stilled. "Owen told me there was a man at the gate," Eli said. "Owen does not mention things unless they are worth mentioning." She looked at this 7-year-old boy with his serious eyes and his carefully managed face, and she thought about how much work it was, being that perceptive at that age, being the kind of child who noticed everything, and filed it all away, and connected things that adults thought they were keeping separate. "Someone from my old pack," she said. "It is handled." "Is it?" he said, with the precise skepticism of someone who was not going to accept a convenient answer. "It is being handled," she said. He considered this. Then he nodded, accepting the amendment as accurate. "Good," he said. He picked up his medical text. "You should come back tomorrow. I want to understand the part about infection." "I will be here," she said. She walked out of Eli's room and stood in the corridor for a moment, one hand against the wall. Down the hall she could hear Wren singing something tuneless and cheerful to the wooden horse. From the far wing, she could hear Cale's small sounds, wakeful but not unhappy. The house moved around her, full of the particular noise of 3 children existing in it, and she stood in the middle of it and breathed. Marcus's letter was still in her apron pocket. She reached in and took it out. She folded it once, and then once more, until it was very small. She went to the kitchen, where the fire was going in the hearth, and she held the small folded rectangle over the flame until it caught, and she held it until she had to drop it, and she watched it finish burning in the grate. "It is not finished, Lena." She watched the last of it turn to ash. She disagreed. She went back to her work. That evening at supper, Wren informed the table that he had decided he wanted to be a healer when he grew up. Eli said that this was a reasonable ambition. Cale looked at Wren with a kind of careful, quiet attention that was not quite a smile, but was not far from one either. Cale threw his spoon off the edge of his tray and watched where it went with enormous satisfaction. Lena picked up the spoon and put it back, and told herself she was not going to think about the ash in the grate or the man at the gate, and she mostly succeeded, and the supper was warm, and the table was full, and outside the pale autumn dark had settled over the palace grounds, and for this evening at least, everything held. 3 days later, Marcus came to the gate again. This time he came in. She was in the garden with Wren when Owen appeared at the kitchen door and caught her eye. She recognized the look. She said to Wren, "Stay here and keep watering." And he said, "This plant already has enough water." And she said, "Then talk to it." And he said, "Plants do not talk back." And she said, "You might be surprised," and went inside. Marcus was standing in the front receiving room. He looked exactly the same. Dark hair, neat, broad-shouldered, wearing the marks of his new beta rank, with the careful pride of someone who has recently acquired them. He turned when she came in. He looked at her the way he always had, with the particular familiarity of someone who has known you for a long time and has decided, based on that familiarity, that they understand you. The presumption of it hit her immediately. "Lena," he said. There was warmth in his voice, warmth that she had once believed was real, and now looked at from the outside and saw as a performance, a very well-practiced one. "Marcus," she said. She did not sit down. She also did not offer him a seat. She stood in the middle of the receiving room and looked at him across the space between them, and she felt, with some surprise, that she was not afraid. She had half expected to be afraid, to find herself back in the old helplessness of someone who has been told they are not enough by someone they loved. But she was not afraid. She was tired, a little, and she was very clear. "You look well," he said. "I am well," she said. He looked around the room. "This is quite a place," he said. "It is," she said. She did not elaborate. He looked back at her. The warmth in his expression was shifting slightly, making room for something else, something more like the expression of a person who has prepared for one version of a conversation and is realizing they may be in the wrong version. "You left without saying goodbye," he said. She looked at him steadily. "You said goodbye for both of us," she said, "in front of the whole pack. I thought that was sufficient." His jaw tightened fractionally. "That was not how I wanted it to go." "And yet," she said. He looked at her. He was deciding something. She could see the decision happening in his face, and she waited with the patience of someone who is no longer interested in what the other person decides. "I made a mistake," he said. She did not reply. "The arrangement with Cora is not what I expected," he said. "She is strong, and she is capable, and she is nothing like you." He said this as if it were a compliment, as if "nothing like you" was a comparison that had resolved in her favor. She kept her face completely still. "I am sorry to hear that," she said, in the tone of someone who is not sorry at all, but has been raised too well to say so. "I want you to come home," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about Greywood, about the hall with the paper lanterns, about the healer's keys on the step. She thought about the weeks she had been here, about Wren and his wooden horse, about Eli and his medical texts, about Cale's small hand wrapped around her finger, about standing in a corridor at midnight listening to a man carefully skip the creaking step on the way to bed. "This is my home," she said. The silence that followed was different from the silence at the bonding ceremony. That one had been full of everyone else's feelings. This one was just his, the particular silence of a person who has arrived, expecting a door to be open, and found it closed. "You work here," he said. The warmth was gone now. "Yes," she said. "I also live here. And I also belong here, which is more than I can say for how I felt in Greywood." "Lena," he said. His voice had shifted again, into something harder. "You are an Omega, living alone on Alpha King territory. People will talk. You should consider what that means for your reputation." She nearly laughed. She stopped herself because laughing at him would have felt good, in a way that she did not want to give him. Instead, she looked at him very calmly. "My reputation," she said, "was already what you made of it when you said what you said in front of everyone. I have stopped caring what people who were there that night think of me." He looked at her with the specific frustration of someone who expected a different person, and cannot understand why she did not show up. The door behind him opened. Cale Draven walked in. He came in the way he always came into rooms, without announcement, without effort, the authority simply arriving with him, as if it were a physical thing. He looked at Marcus with an expression of complete neutrality, and in that neutrality, there was something that was significantly more powerful than any show of feeling would have been. Marcus turned. He straightened immediately, the way people straighten when they realize they are in the presence of someone whose rank is considerably higher than their own. "Alpha King Draven," Marcus said, and his voice was entirely different, formal and careful. "Beta Cole," Cale said, "you are visiting unannounced." "I apologize for the intrusion," Marcus said. "I came to speak with Lena. She is known to me." "I am aware," Cale said. He looked at Lena briefly, and then back at Marcus. "Did you resolve what you came for?" Lena said, clearly, "Yes." Marcus looked at her. He opened his mouth. "Then I will have Owen show you out," Cale said, in the tone of someone who has moved past a decision that someone else thought was still open for discussion. Owen appeared as if summoned, which he probably was, and Marcus had no graceful option but to follow him. He looked back at Lena once, at the door. She did not look away. She held his gaze steadily until he was gone. The door closed. She and Cale were alone in the receiving room. She let out a slow breath. "Thank you," she said. "You handled it." he said. You helped, she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the door. He will come back, he said. I know, she said. I am not worried about him. He looked at her then, and something in that look was different from the usual careful distance. There was something in it that was paying attention to her, in a way that was not entirely about the situation. She was not sure what to do with that, so she did not do anything with it. Ren is in the garden talking to a plant, she said. The edge of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the precursor to one, the shape that comes just before. He does that, Kale said. Does it work? She said. The plants seem fine, he said. She walked toward the door, and this time she was the one almost smiling, and she did not let it show, but she was aware of it all the way back to the garden, where Ren was in fact having a very serious conversation with a dormant rosebush, and did not seem to think this was unusual. She sat down in the grass beside him, and picked up her gardening gloves and went back to work. And the afternoon was quiet, and Marcus was gone, and for now, that was enough. November arrived the way it always did in the Northern Territory. Not with wind first, but with quiet, a deepening of the silence between things, the sound of the world pulling inward. The garden went gray and brown. The trees along the palace boundary lost the last of their leaves. The mornings turned dark at both ends. Short days pressed between long nights, and the house adapted the way houses do. More fires, heavier curtains drawn earlier, the kitchen becoming the warmest and most populated room in the building. Lena had been in the palace for 6 weeks when she understood that she was happy. She understood it the way you understand something that has been true for a while before you name it. She was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of tea, watching Ren and Eli in the garden below. Eli reading on the bench with one eye on the page and one eye on his brother, who was doing something with sticks that may or may not have been building something. Kale was strapped to her back in a cloth wrap that Owen had found in a trunk somewhere, and Lena had figured out through trial and considerable error, and one helpful book from the library. He was asleep against her shoulder, warm and heavy in the specific way of sleeping babies. She was standing there, in this house that was not hers, with someone else's child on her back and 2 more in the garden below, and she was happy. Quietly and completely and without condition. She thought, oh, there it is. She had not expected that. She had expected to find stability here, and she had. She had expected to find purpose, and she had found that too. She had not expected to find this, the particular contentment of someone who is in exactly the right place, doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing. She had not expected it, and so she had not seen it arriving. She drank her tea and watched Ren achieve some structural success with his sticks, and held it, the feeling, quietly, the way her mother had once said, you hold things you do not want to lose, not too tightly. The days had developed a rhythm that she had not engineered, but had simply allowed to form. Mornings belonged to the boys. She was with them through breakfast and the first part of the day, overseeing lessons with Eli, who had a formal tutor on Mondays and Wednesdays, but preferred learning with her on the other days, in a way he had not said directly, but demonstrated clearly by appearing at the door of whatever room she was in. With Ren through the mid-morning, which had become their time for the garden, for stories, for the particular meandering conversations of a 5-year-old who had thoughts about everything and felt strongly that they should be heard. Kale was a joint project between her and Polly, and, increasingly, Owen, who had developed the habit of taking Kale for 20-minute walks around the house in the early afternoon, during which Kale apparently became very interested in the door frames and the pattern of the ceiling, and was cooperative in the particular way of babies who are being stimulated by something genuinely interesting to them. Evenings were the supper table and after. Evenings were when she noticed Kale most. Not in the way she had noticed Marcus, which had always had a slightly held breath quality to it, the noticing of someone waiting for approval. This was different. This was the noticing of someone who had begun to find another person interesting, in the way that complicated, quiet people become interesting, when you have spent enough time near them to see past the surfaces they maintain. She noticed that he was different with the boys in November than he had been in October. She could not have said exactly what the difference was, but it was there. He sat closer to them at the table. He asked them questions that were not just administrative, not just what did you learn and did you eat your breakfast, but actually curious questions, like what do you think about that, and have you considered this other thing? He still held himself at a slight remove, A habit she was beginning to understand had very deep roots, but the remove was smaller than it had been. She thought she was responsible for some of that. She was not sure how she felt about thinking that, because it was not a small thing to be responsible for. But she thought it was true. She thought that the boys' improved sleeping, and their improved behavior, and their improved general experience of being in their own home, was moving through the house like a change in temperature, subtle but total, and Cale was in the house too, and you could not be in a warmer house and feel nothing. She was thinking about this at the kitchen window when she heard his footsteps in the corridor. She recognized them by now. She would not have been able to explain how. She just did. He came into the kitchen and looked at her standing at the window with Cale on her back and a cup of tea in her hand, and he stopped. She looked at him. "He is asleep," she said quietly. Cale looked at his youngest son, at the small face against Lena's shoulder, at the way the baby's mouth was slightly open, and his fist was curled against the cloth of the wrap. Something moved across Cale's face that he did not manage to prevent. It was brief, and it was real, and it was the thing she had been seeing pieces of for weeks, the version of him that existed under the authority and the stillness. He looked away before she could look too long at it. "He is sleeping well," he said. His voice was steady. "Better," she said. "Not perfectly, but better." He nodded. He came to the counter and poured coffee in the way he always poured coffee, as if the machine of the morning required coffee, and he was simply part of that machine. He leaned against the counter and held the cup and looked at the garden where his older sons were visible through the window. "Eli asked me last night if I thought his mother would have liked reading about medicine," he said. Lena went still. She waited. "He has not asked about her directly in almost a year," Cale said. His voice was the same, measured and low, but she could hear what was underneath it, the careful management of something that was not simple. "He asked me, and I said yes. I said she would have been very proud of him. He said he already knew that, he just wanted to hear me say it." He stopped. Lena looked at him. He was looking at the garden, not at her. "He is 7, Cale said. "He carries things that 7-year-olds should not carry." "He does," Lena said. "He is also learning to put some of them down, slowly." "Because of you," he said. She shook her head. "Because of himself. I just sit with him while he does it." Cale looked at her then. The same look as before, the one that was paying attention to her in a way that was not about the situation. She held it this time, did not look away, did not redirect the conversation. She just looked back. It lasted for a few seconds, then he looked down at his cup. "I am not good at this," he said. She was not sure exactly what this was. She did not ask. She thought it covered several things. "You are better than you think," she said. He did not respond to that. He finished his coffee and went back to his study, and she turned back to the window, and Cale shifted slightly on her back and made a small sound and resettled. She stood at the window and thought about the look and what it meant and what she was going to do about it, which was nothing, for now, because doing something about it was not something she was ready for, and neither, she was quite certain, was he. But she filed it away. In the careful, honest part of herself, she filed it away. That afternoon, Eli came to find her. He had his medical text under one arm, and the look of someone who has been composing a sentence for a while. "I told Father about learning medicine," he said. "He said he thought it was a good use of my time." "Did he?" she said. "He said he would find a proper tutor if I wanted one when I was older." Eli paused. "He said you had the right idea." She looked at the child in front of her, this 7-year-old who had been working so hard for so long to be all right on his own, and who was slowly, carefully, beginning to allow himself to not have to be. "Your father said that?" she said. "Yes," Eli said. He looked down at the book. "I thought you should know." She crouched down so she was at his level. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He met her eyes briefly. Then he straightened and opened the book. "I want to understand the chapter about fever," he said, because Eli showed affection by returning to work, which she had come to understand was one of his ways of saying something without saying it. "All right," she said. "Let us start with why fever happens." They sat at the kitchen table, and the afternoon darkened outside, and Owen brought them both hot drinks without being asked, and she taught, and Eli learned, and in his room down the hall, Kale slept on in the wrap she had set up as a hammock, and Wren came in from the garden with mud on both knees, and his eyes bright, and said he had completed his construction. And the kitchen was warm, and the house was full, and somewhere in the study, a man who was bad at this was sitting with his coffee, and perhaps thinking about what better looked like. She hoped he was. She suspected he was. She turned back to Eli's questions about fever, and let the rest of it sit where it was. There would be time. She believed that, now, in a way she had not believed anything since she had walked out of that hall in Greywood, with her hands still and her face still, and her heart going quietly to pieces. She believed there would be time. That night, after the boys were all in bed, she stood in the corridor outside her room and listened to the house. She heard Wren's regular breathing through his slightly open door. She heard Kale's small nighttime sounds, the ones that did not mean distress, just the sounds of a sleeping baby existing. She heard Eli's complete silence, which was how he slept, thoroughly, as if sleeping was also a task he was going to do correctly. She heard, from the study downstairs, the small sound of a lamp being turned on. He was awake, as always, working probably, or sitting there not working, thinking about things he carried, the way his oldest son carried things, quietly and alone. She went into her room and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall. She was happy. She was happy here. And something else was happening too, something newer and less settled, something she was going to have to decide what to do about eventually. Not tonight. Tonight she was just going to let it be what it was. She lay down and pulled the blanket up and looked at the ceiling, and listened to the house breathe around her, and thought, not for the first time, that this place had been cold before she came, and was warm now, and that she was not sure anymore, whether she was the reason, or whether the warmth had been here all along, waiting for someone to find it. She fell asleep thinking about that, and the answer came to her in the way answers sometimes do. Not as a thought but as a feeling, a settling, and the feeling was that some things are both, the searcher and the found, arriving at each other from opposite sides. Outside, the night was clear and very cold, and the stars were out over the northern palace for the first time in weeks, and the world was very quiet. The next morning she woke to a knock on her door before the sun was fully up. Owen. She heard it in the quality of the knock, a practical rap, not urgent but purposeful. She opened the door. Owen looked at her with his careful face. "There is a formal courier downstairs," he said, "for the Alpha King. He arrived an hour ago from the east. I thought you should know." "Why me?" she said. Owen said, mildly, "Because the letter he carries has been copied to the house, which means it concerns the household, and the Alpha King has not yet come down, and the courier is insisting it is time-sensitive." She understood. Owen was telling her something without telling her something. "I will be down in 5 minutes," she said. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. The courier was a young man standing in the entrance hall with the rigid posture of someone who has been told the message he carries is important and has taken that responsibility very seriously. He held an envelope sealed with a mark she did not recognize. Kale appeared at the top of the stairs while she was still looking at the courier. He came down without hurry, dressed, awake, already in the particular state of controlled readiness she had come to associate with him in situations that were not routine. He took the envelope, he opened it, he read it once and then a second time. She watched his face, which did not change in any way she could read externally, but she was better at reading it than she had been, and she could see that something had arrived in it that required managing. He looked up. The courier said, "Shall I wait for a reply, sir?" "No," Kale said. "I will send word by my own courier." He looked at Owen, who took the young man away to get food and rest. Then Kale looked at Lena. She waited. "There is to be a formal summit," he said. 3 weeks from now. Representatives from 6 territories. The host will be Alpha Gideon Farr of the Eastern Reach. He paused. "It is a territorial matter, largely. New trade agreements. Formal boundary confirmations." He folded the letter with one hand. "I am required to attend." "All right," she said. "I will be away for 4 days," he said. "Possibly 5. She nodded. "We will manage," she said. "Owen and Polly and I can handle things here." He looked at her for a moment. Something was moving behind his expression that was not about the summit. "You will be required to come," he said. She stilled. I am sorry? The invitation is extended to my household, he said. He looked at the folded letter. Gideon Farr is thorough in his forms. The invitation lists the Alpha King and his household representatives. You are the head of care for the palace. It would be unusual for you not to be present. He looked at her directly. I am not requiring you to come. I am informing you that your absence would be noted. She understood what he was not saying, which was that her presence would also say something, specifically about her position here, about what this house was and who was in it. Her attending a formal summit at Kale's side would not be a private arrangement between two people. It would be a statement. What kind of statement are you comfortable making? She said. He held her gaze. An accurate one, he said. She thought about that for a long moment. All right, she said. I will come. He nodded. He went back upstairs. She stood in the entrance hall and looked at the door through which the courier had gone, and she thought about standing at a formal summit in a room full of Alpha representatives, and what that would mean, and what it would cost, and what it might give back. She thought about Gideon Farr of the Eastern Reach, a name she knew from the reports and the papers, a name that came attached to a reputation for territorial ambition and a thorough knowledge of bloodlines. She thought, for no reason she could immediately identify, about the word bloodline. And a cold, small feeling moved through her that she pushed aside because it was too early for that, too shapeless, not yet a real concern. She went to make breakfast. She would think about it later. The summit was held in the Eastern Reach at a building called Farr House, which was old and large and gave the impression of a place that had hosted a great many significant conversations and was pleased about this in a quiet, settled way. Lena had spent the 4-hour journey reading the briefing papers Owen had prepared, because Owen had prepared briefing papers without being asked, which told her she had been right to take the small, cold feeling seriously. She had read about the 6 territories, and their representatives, and their various interests, and the specific shape of the trade agreements being proposed, and she had read about Gideon Farr himself, which was more information than the standard reports, because Owen had added to the standard reports with his own careful observations, which he had been making for years. Gideon Farr was 60 years old and had run the Eastern Reach for 30 of them. He was known for 3 things: formal precision, territorial memory that stretched back generations, and an interest in what he called heritage documentation, which was a polite name for the tracking of bloodlines. He had been building a registry of Omega bloodlines in the Eastern Territories for the past 10 years. He called it preservation. Others called it something less comfortable. She had read that paragraph twice on the journey, and then put the papers away and looked out the window at the gray November countryside and thought about her own bloodline, which was nothing, as far as she had ever been told. An Omega from a middle-ranked pack, unremarkable parents, no documented history of anything unusual. She had grown up knowing nothing about her ancestry, beyond what her parents had mentioned in passing, and they had not mentioned much. There was nothing there to find. She told herself that, and mostly believed it, and arrived at Farr House with her composure intact, and her shoes better suited to the occasion than the ones she had worn to her bonding ceremony 8 weeks ago. The first session of the summit was a formal dinner. 12 people around a long table, the representatives of 6 territories and their accompanying staff. Lena sat 3 places to Kale's left, where the household representative typically sat, and she understood within the first 10 minutes that this arrangement was more complicated than she had expected. Gideon Farr sat at the opposite end of the table. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and excellent posture, and eyes that were the particular color of something that has been the same shade for decades and does not intend to change. He looked at the assembled group with the host's practiced attention, making eye contact with each person at the appropriate moment, saying the appropriate thing. When his gaze reached Lena, it stayed slightly longer than the others. She held it without expression. He smiled. It was a perfectly courteous smile. She did not trust it at all. The dinner moved through its formal courses and its formal conversations, the careful dance of powerful people feeling out positions before committing to them. Lena spoke when spoken to and listened carefully when not. She was seated beside the representative of the Western Pack, a woman named Harriet Cole, who was sharp and efficient and had no patience for small talk, which Lena found refreshing. Harriet said, between the second and third course, at a volume audible only to Lena, "Farr has been looking at you since you sat down." I noticed, Lena said. Do you know why? Harriet said. I have a theory, Lena said. So do I, Harriet said. And then, the next course arrived, and the conversation moved on. After dinner, there was an informal gathering hour, where people stood in small groups, and conducted the conversations they had not been able to have at the table. Cale was in a group with two of the other Alpha representatives. He was doing the thing she had seen him do at the Tuesday meetings, becoming purely the Alpha King, all the tiredness gone, every word chosen. She was standing near the window with a cup of tea, when Gideon Farr appeared beside her. Miss Graves, he said. He said her name with the ease of someone who had done their research. Mr. Farr, she said. You are the household representative for the Northern Realm, he said. Caretaker for the Alpha King's children, she said. Those are slightly different things. He smiled again. Slightly, he agreed. Though in my experience, the person who holds a household's children tends to hold a great deal more than that. She looked at him pleasantly and said nothing. He looked at her the way he had looked at her at dinner, with that specific, cataloging attention that she understood now was not casual. He was gathering information. He had been gathering it since she arrived. She could not tell yet exactly what category he had placed her in, but she was certain she was in a category. Your family name is Graves, he said. Are you connected to the Graves line from the northern coast? She looked at him. I have no knowledge of that, she said. Your mother's name? He said. It was a personal question, and a forward one, but she was in a formal setting, and he was the host, and refusing directly would be noted. Ada, she said. Ada Morrow before she married. Something moved across his face. It was brief, and she caught it, only because she had been watching for exactly that kind of movement. Morrow, he said, as if tasting the word. Interesting. Is it? She said. There is an old Morrow line, he said, largely lost. Very old bloodline, not widely known. The ability that accompanied it was documented twice in the last century and not since. He looked at her with a kind of calculated interest that made her want to step back, though she did not. It was a healing ability, he said, specific to Omegas. Quite rare. She held very still. I am a healer's assistant, she said. I learned from a trained healer over 3 years. There is nothing unusual about it. No, he said. Of course not. But his eyes said something different. She looked at him steadily for another moment. Then she said, It has been a pleasure speaking with you, Mr. Farr. Will you excuse me? She walked across the room before he could reply, and she kept her pace even, and her expression clear, and she went directly to where Cale was standing. He looked at her when she arrived. He read her face in the brief, practiced way he had developed over the past weeks, the shorthand of two people who have shared the same house long enough to know when something has happened. He said nothing. He shifted slightly so she was included in the group, and she stood beside him and listened to the conversation, and felt, gradually, the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Later, much later, when the gathering was finished, and she and Cale were in the corridor outside their respective rooms, she told him about the conversation. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Farr's registry, he said. Yes, she said. It is legal, he said, but the way he said it made clear that legal and acceptable were two different things in his view. He cannot compel documentation. He does not need to compel it, she said. He can find it other ways. He has people who research lineage professionally. Cale looked at her. What do you know about your mother's family? He said. Very little, she said. She did not talk about them much. She was estranged from them when she married my father. I know they were from the coast. I know she left when she was 17. Why? She looked at him. She never said directly. She said she left because the life they expected her to lead was not the one she wanted. I assumed she meant the expectations placed on women there, the traditional restrictions. She did not seem to miss them. He was quiet. Farr will investigate, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Cale said. And if he finds something, she said. If the bloodline is real and documented, what does that mean for him? Cale looked at the wall. His jaw was set. Under Eastern Territory law, he said, an Omega, with a documented rare bloodline, living outside formal pack protection, can be claimed as a legal ward of the territory, where her bloodline is registered. He said it carefully, the way you say something distasteful while keeping your voice neutral. It is an old law. Most territories do not enforce it. Farr has used it twice in the past 5 years. The cold feeling she had pushed aside at breakfast was back, and larger. I am not outside formal pack protection, she said. I live on your territory. You are a guest, he said, a contracted caretaker, not a formal member of the Northern Pack. She looked at him. He looked back at her. What would formal membership look like, she said. He was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. There are several ways to establish it, he said. He said nothing further. She looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor was very quiet. All right, she said finally. We should think about this carefully. Yes, he said. Tomorrow, she said, when we have both slept. Yes, he said. She went into her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the wall. An old Morrow line, a healing ability. Her mother at 17, leaving a family that expected her to lead a specific life. A man at a dinner table looking at her, as if he already knew what she was before she did. She thought about her mother putting leaves and pebbles on windowsills, which was not her mother but Claire, and that thought was disorienting, the way thoughts become disorienting, when you have been awake for a long time, and your mind starts making connections before it has enough information. She took a breath. She thought clearly. She was not afraid of Gideon Farr. She was cautious of him, which was the intelligent response. She was also suddenly aware that the arrangement she had with Cale, the practical and sensible arrangement that had begun on a rainy night with a lantern and a puddle on a stone floor, had become something that needed to be examined more directly. Because it was no longer just the two of them deciding how to live in the same house. There was a child on a floor holding her finger. There were 2 boys who had moved her to the top of a specific internal hierarchy. There was a man who skipped the 3rd step on the staircase at midnight, and there was something outside this house that wanted to make a decision about her. She was not going to let it. She lay down. She did not sleep immediately. She lay there thinking about what it meant to be protected and what it meant to protect, and how those 2 things had, somewhere in the past 8 weeks, quietly become entangled for her in ways she was going to have to be honest about. She fell asleep eventually, and in the morning she was going to deal with it, all of it. Starting with Cale Draven, and the conversation they had almost had in the corridor, and the one they were going to finish. She woke at 5 in the morning to the sound of voices in the corridor. Not loud voices, not an argument, but voices at an hour, when voices should not be, which was enough. She dressed and opened her door. Cale was standing in the corridor with a man she did not recognize, a younger man in travel clothing, clearly having ridden through the night. Cale was holding a paper and reading it. His face was the still, unreadable face, but she had learned to read what was under it, and what was under it now was controlled alarm. He looked up when she appeared. "Go back inside," he said. "What is it?" she said. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the man beside him and said, "Wait downstairs," and the man went. Cale held the paper out to her. She took it. She read it. It was from Owen, sent through the night courier. It was brief. Owen's communications were always brief. It said that Marcus Cole had arrived at the Northern Palace gate at dusk and had produced a document claiming that Lena Graves had left the Greywood Pack in breach of an active contract and must be returned. The document was signed by the new Pack Council. Owen had refused him. Marcus had said he would return with a formal territorial escort. She lowered the paper. "He cannot do this," she said. "The contract claim is almost certainly false," Cale said. "You told me you were not under contract." "I was not," she said. "I was a volunteer worker. No signed contract, no binding agreement, just work I chose to do, and could stop at any time." "Then it falls apart under challenge," he said. "But a formal territorial escort creates a legal situation that takes time to resolve, and Farr is at this summit." She understood. Farr had been waiting to understand what she was before he moved. Marcus had been waiting to find leverage, and they were both here, in the same place, and she was not. "They are working together," she said. Cale said nothing, which was the same as yes. She handed the paper back to him. She stood in the corridor of Farr House, in the Eastern Territory, a long journey from the Northern Palace, and she looked at the man in front of her and thought about the choice that was already being made for her by other people and how she felt about that. She felt Specifically, that it was over her dead body. "I am not going back to Greywood," she said. Her voice was steady and absolutely certain. "No," Cale said. "You are not." She looked at him. "We are going home," he said. "Now, today. I am ending the summit early. I will send Owen instructions this morning, and when we arrive back at the Northern Palace, we are going to have the conversation that should have happened 2 weeks ago." She looked at him for a moment. "Which conversation is that?" she said. He looked back at her. He was doing the thing where he was being very careful about his words, not from dishonesty, but from the habit of a man who has spent years measuring what he allows himself to say. "The one," he said, "about what you are to this house. To me, not as a practical arrangement." He stopped. He looked at the wall briefly. "The one I do not know how to have well, but am going to try." She looked at him for a long time. "All right," she said. "We leave at 7, he said. "I will be ready," she said. She went back into her room and sat down and put her hands flat on her knees and breathed steadily, in and out, while the morning grew lighter outside the window, and the Eastern Territory moved into another day that she was not going to spend in it. She thought about Wren and Eli and Cale, home in the palace, and the 3 words Cale had said, "I will try." She thought about what it costs a man like him to say that, what it requires, what it means. She thought about her mother, who had left a family that expected a specific life from her, and had gone and built her own. She started packing. At 7, they were in the carriage and moving north. Cale sat across from her and did not speak much, but the silence between them was different from the silences of 6 weeks ago. It had weight in it, and direction, and the particular quality of 2 people who are traveling towards something rather than simply sitting in the same moving space. At one point he looked at her and said, "Are you afraid?" She thought about it honestly. "Not of Far," she said. "Not of Marcus. Slightly afraid of the conversation." Something moved in his face that was almost a smile. "So am I," he said. She looked at him. "That is oddly, very reassuring," she said. He looked back at her, and this time very briefly. It was a real smile, small and unexpected, and gone quickly, but real. She turned to look at the road. They traveled north through the morning, and the day was gray and cold and moving fast around them. And somewhere ahead, the palace was full of 3 boys who were waiting, and something was coming that she was not entirely prepared for, and was going to face anyway, because that was what she did. She watched the miles go and held herself steady, and felt, despite everything, ready. They arrived back at the Northern Palace in the late afternoon, and the boys were at the window before the carriage had fully stopped. Lena knew this because she saw 2 small heads appear at the upper floor window, and then disappear, and then heard running footsteps through the walls, and by the time she was out of the carriage and on the path, the front door was already open, and Wren was coming down the steps, at a pace that was specifically not allowed, and that Owen was calling after him about from the doorway. Wren reached her and stopped. He looked at her with his serious dark eyes, and then without any preamble at all he put his arms around her middle and pressed his face against her coat. She put her arms around him and held him there. "We managed fine," he said into her coat, muffled, "but it was less interesting." "I can imagine," she said. Eli was on the steps, walking down them at his usual precise pace. He stopped at the bottom and looked at her, and she could read his face now well enough to see past the careful expression to the actual feeling underneath it. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would," she said. "I know," he said. "I believed you. I just wanted to confirm it was true." She looked at him. "It is true," she said. He nodded once. Then he went back up the steps and into the house, in the specific way of a child who has shown as much feeling as he intends to show, and is now retreating to compose himself. Cale, who had been 2 steps behind her, watched this. She saw his face over Wren's head, and she saw the thing he did not manage to contain when he watched his sons, the specific softness that had no public version. Owen appeared and took the travel bags and gave Cale a look that communicated information efficiently without words. Cale gave a brief nod back. That was the conversation about Marcus's visit, handled in 2 expressions by 2 people who had worked together long enough to not need words for certain things. Cale was brought down by Polly, who looked relieved to see Lena in the specific way that suggested the past day and a half had been effortful. Cale looked at Lena with the focused attention of a baby who has been processing something and has not finished processing it, and then he reached for her. She took him. He settled immediately, one hand gripping her collar. "He has been particular," Polly said, with the diplomacy of a woman describing a difficult time in the most agreeable possible terms. "He will be fine now," Lena said. "Go rest." Polly went. Owen took the bags. Wren was already inside, recounting to the corridor at large everything he had done in the 2 days they had been away. The house reformed itself around its people, the way houses do when someone returns, and the household closes back up around them. Lena was in the kitchen feeding Cale his supper, when Cale appeared in the doorway. She looked up. "Tonight," he said, "after they are asleep." She knew what he meant. The conversation. "Yes," she said. He nodded and went back to his study. She fed Cale and bathed him and sat with him while he settled to sleep, which took longer than usual because he had missed her in whatever 9-month-old way babies miss the people they have attached to. She sat in the small chair beside his bed and hummed the melody she always hummed, low and tuneless, and after 20 minutes, his breathing evened and his grip on her finger loosened, and he was asleep. Wren was already in bed, talking to himself in the low, private voice he used when he was telling himself a story before sleep. She tapped his door gently. "Good night, Wren," she said through the crack. "Good night, Lena," he said, and did not pause the story. Eli's light was on. She knocked and was told to come in. He was at his desk, but he was not reading. He was sitting with his hands folded on the closed book, and he looked up when she entered. "Is there something happening?" he said. She sat down on the edge of his bed, across from him. "There is something that needs to be dealt with," she said. "A formal matter. An outside person who thinks they have a claim on something in this house." Eli looked at her steadily. "On you," he said. "Yes," she said. "Can they?" he said. "No," she said. "But they are going to try, and it requires some things to be made clear." He thought about this. "Is Father handling it?" he said. "We are handling it together," she said. Something in his expression changed, very slightly. "Together," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at his desk. He said, with the care of a child choosing words, "I think that is good." He paused. "Claire, my mother, she always said that things done together are harder to undo." Lena looked at him. "She was right," she said softly. Eli looked at the desk a moment longer. Then he looked at her. "I should sleep," he said, which was his version of the conversation being complete. "Good night, Eli," she said. "Good night, Lena," he said. "I am glad you are back." She went downstairs. The house was quiet now, the particular night quiet that she had come to think of as the house resting, all its activity folded inward. Owen had left a lamp on in the hall and a pot of tea in the kitchen with a cup beside it, which was the kind of Owen thing Owen did. She poured a cup and carried it to the study. Cale was behind the desk. He was not working. He was sitting with his hands on the desk, and he was looking at nothing, which was rare for him. He looked up when she came in. She sat in the chair across from him, the same chair she had sat in when he had made the arrangement 8 weeks ago. She put the cup down on the edge of the desk. She did not make him begin. She began. "I want to tell you something honestly," she said, "before we talk about Farr and Marcus and what needs to happen legally." He waited. "I came here with nothing," she said. "I was going nowhere. I had just been told in front of everyone I knew that I was not enough, and I was cold and wet and lost, and you brought me in and offered me work, and I took it, because I had no better option, and I needed shelter." She looked at the desk. "That is how it started. That is what it was." She looked up. "That is not what it is now," she said. He looked at her. "I love your sons," she said. "I know that is a very large thing to say, and I am saying it anyway, because I believe in being accurate about important things. I love them. Not because it is my job. I would love them if you stopped paying me tomorrow. I would love them in 10 years if I left here and never came back. They are mine, in the way that children become yours when you choose to show up for them every day, and they choose to let you." He was very still. "And something else has happened," she said, "that I was not expecting, and did not plan for, and have been trying to be careful about, because I am in this house, on your terms, and I did not want to be the person who made a simple arrangement complicated." She stopped. Say it, he said. His voice was low. She looked at him. I care about you, she said. Not as a practical arrangement. Not as an employer. I care about you the way I now understand you can care about a person you have been watching and listening to, and sitting in the same house with for weeks, while they try very hard not to be cared about. Silence. I am not asking you for anything, she said. I am not trying to make this into something it is not. I am just trying to be honest, because Farr and Marcus are going to try to make decisions about my life, and I refuse to go into that without being honest about what my life is. Cale looked at her for a long time. He stood. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her, and she looked up at him and she thought, whatever he says, I can hold it. He said, I have not been good at this, at letting things matter. I have been keeping everything at a manageable distance for so long that I am not sure I know how not to. He stopped. He looked at his hands. I know what you are to my sons. I can see it every time they look at you. I know what you have done for this house, for how it feels to live in it. He looked at her. And I know what you have done to me, he said, which I have been trying to not say, because I am better at running a territory than at saying things like this. You are doing well, she said, which was the wrong thing to say, perhaps, but she could not help it. He looked at her, and the edge of his mouth moved. I do not want you to go, he said. I do not want Farr or Marcus or anyone else to have a claim on you. Not because of the house or the boys, though those are real, because I do not want you to go. She looked at him. Then make me a formal member of the Northern Pack, she said. That is what closes the legal gap. That is what removes the claim. I know, he said. That is what I wanted to discuss. Then let us discuss it, she said. He sat on the edge of the desk, facing her. They were close. Not touching, but close. There are ways to formalize it, he said. The simplest is a declaration of household membership. It requires witnesses and a record. It does not require anything further. And is that what you are offering? She said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands again, and then at her. No, he said, it is not. She waited. I am asking if you would consider something further, he said. In time, not tonight, not as a transaction, not to solve the problem, separately from the problem. I am asking whether you would consider it. She looked at him. She thought about 8 weeks. She thought about the lamp in the study at midnight and the careful step on the staircase. She thought about Eli saying, I am glad you are back. I would consider it, she said. He let out a breath. It was a small sound, but she heard it. For now, she said, let us do the declaration. Let us close the gap. And then let us take the rest slowly and honestly, and do it correctly. Yes, he said. And in the morning, she said, you are going to send Farr a very clear message. Yes, he said again. And this time the tiredness was gone from the word entirely. She stood. She picked up her tea. She looked at him. Good night, Cale, she said. It was the first time she had used his name. He looked at her when she said it. Something in his face opened slightly. Good night, Lena, he said. She walked out of the study and through the hall and up the stairs, skipping the creaking step without thinking about it, and she went to her room and sat on the bed and held the cup of tea in both hands and felt, with great clarity, that she had just taken a step she was not going to go back from. She did not want to go back from it. She drank her tea and went to sleep. 3 days later, the declaration was made. Owen had found the correct form in the palace records, a document that predated most of the current territorial laws, but remained legally valid. It required the Alpha King's signature and 2 witnesses and a formal reading before the household, and it bound Lena Graves to the Northern Pack with full membership rights and all the protections that entailed. Cale signed it in the morning. Owen and Polly witnessed it. Harriet Cole, who had traveled from the Western Territory because Owen had apparently contacted her, witnessed it as well, and said very little about that except that she had been in the area. Wren said, when it was explained to him in suitable terms, that this meant Lena was officially part of their house now, and he made an expression of complete satisfaction, as if this had been the correct outcome all along, and he could not understand why it had taken so long. Eli said nothing. He sat at the table and folded his hands, and looked at the signed document for a long moment. Then he looked at Lena. Then he went to the library and came back with a book about medicinal plants, and said he had a question about Chapter 4. She answered his question. She taught him about the plants. They sat at the table for an hour, him asking and her explaining. And neither of them said anything about what had just happened, because with Eli, the way you showed that something mattered was by continuing to do the work. She understood that now. She understood all three of them in the particular way you understand people when you have been showing up for them long enough. The document was copied and sent to the Eastern Registry, which meant Farr received notice within the week. The response from his office was courteous and brief, and acknowledged the formal membership without objection, because there was no legal objection to make. A second message came from Marcus Cole, shorter than the first. It said nothing that required answering. She did not answer it. Cale received a request for a formal meeting from Farr's office regarding the trade summit discussions that had been ended early. He replied that he would attend a rescheduled date at his convenience, and that the Northern Realm's terms had not changed. He showed her both replies before he sent them, which was not required by any arrangement between them. She read them and gave her opinion on the wording, which he listened to and incorporated in both cases. Harriet Cole, at the door before she left for the Western Territory, had looked at Lena and said, "You are either very brave or very certain." "Is there a difference?" Lena said. Harriet had thought about it. "Not in practice," she said, and shook her hand, and left. And then the house was quiet again, and the November afternoon was cold and gray, and Owen made supper, and Wren talked all the way through it, and Eli asked a follow-up question about a medical concept from the morning, and Cale threw his spoon off the tray again, and was delighted by this, and Cale looked at the table with the expression that was not quite a smile, but was not far from one. Lena sat in her place at the table, in her house, in her pack, and held all of it. She was home. She had been home for a while, but now the world knew it too, and that made it real, in a different way, a permanent way, a way that no one outside this house could undo. She thought, all right, now the real thing begins. She did not know yet exactly what the real thing would look like. She did not know how long it would take, or what it would cost, or what it would give. She knew only that she was willing, and that he was trying, and that in this house, there were 3 children who had decided she was theirs, and she had decided the same about them, and that was as solid a foundation as she knew how to build on. She would take it. She would take all of it. Farr's second letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in December, and it was not from his formal office. It was from him personally, and it was longer than the brief, courteous office reply, and it was far more specific. Cale read it first. He brought it to her. She read it at the kitchen table, with Cale asleep in the room above her, and the sound of the boys' lessons coming faintly from down the hall. She read it once, and then put it face down on the table, and looked at the window. The letter said that Farr had completed preliminary research into the Morrow line, and had found documented evidence of an old heritage claim. The claim was not new. It was decades old, predating the current territorial laws, filed by the Eastern Reach on behalf of the Morrow bloodline after the last documented female in the line had disappeared. The claim had been suspended, not dismissed, because the line was believed to have continued. He believed it had continued through her. The letter was courteous. It was even, in its way, respectful. It acknowledged the Northern Pack membership formally. It also stated, with careful precision, that a heritage claim of this nature took precedence over standard pack membership under an agreement between 6 territories signed 40 years ago, of which the Northern Realm was a signatory. It said that this was not a threat. It said that Farr would welcome a meeting to discuss how the claim might be resolved in a manner acceptable to all parties. She put the letter down. Cale was standing across the table from her. "Is it real?" she said. "The agreement. Does it say what he says it says?" "I have sent for the records," Cale said. "Owen is looking. But I believe Farr knows exactly what he is citing. He has been building to this," she said. She was not surprised. She was not afraid either, which surprised her slightly, because the situation as described was significant. She was calm in the way she had been calm at the bonding ceremony, the calm of a person who has decided not to waste energy on feelings that will not help. "Yes," Cale said. "And the Northern Realm is a signatory," she said. "Yes," he said. He said it without expression, but she heard what was underneath it. "That means you cannot simply refuse the claim on territorial grounds," she said. "Not without challenge," he said. There are grounds to challenge. The claim was filed 40 years ago. There are time limitations that may apply. The absence of documented proof of lineage beyond the preliminary research. He paused. It will take time to resolve. Legal time. Formal challenge time. During which the claim remains active, she said. During which you remain a full member of the Northern Pack with all its protections, he said. And the claim cannot compel action without a formal tribunal, which takes months to convene. She looked at him. He knows that, she said. Yes, Cale said. He is not trying to move quickly. He is trying to create a situation where we are managing this indefinitely, a sustained uncertainty. She thought about that. She thought about what a sustained uncertainty looked like from the outside, what it communicated about this house, about Cale's position, about her place in it. He wants leverage, she said, not the claim itself. The existence of an unresolved claim gives him something to hold. Yes, Cale said. She stood. She picked up the letter and held it, and thought about Gideon Farr in his old building, with his careful smile, and his heritage registry, and his 40-year-old legal document. She thought about what a man like that actually wanted, which was not her, specifically. She was a means to an end. What he wanted was a position in relationship to the Northern Realm, a formal relationship that gave him access to its territories and its trade. He wants the trade agreement, she said. Cale looked at her. The one Marcus was trying to negotiate, she said. Formal recognition of Greywood's new leadership. Farr would benefit from that. The Eastern Reach borders Greywood's territory. If Greywood formalizes relations with the Northern Realm through a trade agreement, Farr gets to be the intermediary. That is worth a great deal to him. He wants me to formalize with Cole, Cale said. Through the Eastern Registry, she said, with Farr as the validating authority. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him working through it. He is using me to put pressure on you, she said, and using Marcus to put pressure through me. He wants you to negotiate with him on his terms. And if I do not, Cale said, he pursues the claim, slowly, expensively, indefinitely. That is what the letter says, she said. She set the letter down on the table. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. What do you want to do? She said. He looked at her directly. Challenge the claim, he said, on every legal ground available. Do not negotiate under this kind of pressure. And in the meantime, make it absolutely clear what your position in this house is. She was quiet. Which requires, he said, more slowly, saying something publicly that I have only said to you privately. She looked at him. I am not proposing a transaction, he said. I want to be clear about that. I am not suggesting something because it solves a legal problem. I am suggesting it because I have already decided it is what I want, and the legal problem simply makes the timing more urgent than I intended. She looked at him for a long moment. Say it clearly, she said, not unkindly, just wanting the clear version. I am asking if you will bond with me, he said, not as a solution to Farr, because I want you here, permanently, as my equal. She held that. She thought about 8 weeks. She thought about everything she had seen and learned and felt in those 8 weeks. She thought about Eli asking if someone was giving her trouble. She thought about Wren saying you smell like rain. She thought about Cale's hand on her finger. She thought about this man, standing across from her, who had just said the word permanently and the word equal in the same sentence, without any visible evidence of how much that had cost him. I said I would consider it, she said. I have considered it. And? He said. Yes, she said. He looked at her. The carefully maintained stillness in his face fractured very slightly, just at the edges, and she saw what was under it, which was the relief of someone who has been afraid of an answer for long enough, that hearing the right one requires a moment to absorb. Yes, she said again, more simply. He came around the table. He stopped in front of her, close, the way they had been close in that doorway 8 weeks ago, and this time there was nowhere else to be. He said, I do not know how to do this well. You have said that before, she said. It is still true, he said. I know, she said. I do not need you to do it perfectly. I need you to do it honestly. He nodded. He looked at her. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, the way you take hold of something you do not want to drop. She let him hold it. All right, she said. and that was how it happened. Not with ceremony, not with announcement, not with anything that looked like the occasion. It was from the outside, in a kitchen, on a Tuesday morning, with someone else's letters on the table, and a sleeping baby upstairs, and the sound of Wren's voice drifting down the hall. Exactly the right setting, she thought. Exactly the right amount of ordinary. Owen, when informed, said, "Good," which was all Owen said about most things of significance. Eli, when told that evening, sat with it for a long moment and then said, "She is staying then. Permanently." "Yes," Cale said. Eli looked at Lena. "Good," he said, exactly as Owen had, and went back to his book, and she understood that in Eli's system of expression, that was everything. Wren cried, not from sadness. He cried from the particular overwhelm of a 5-year-old who has been given very good news and does not have the capacity to contain it in any more dignified way. He cried, and then immediately became embarrassed about crying, and tried to redirect by telling them at length about something a bird had done outside the window that morning. She let him tell the whole story. Cale grabbed her hair and said something that was not quite a word yet, but had the clear intention of agreement. The rest of that day moved around them, ordinary and full, the way good days are. Owen made supper. The fire burned in the kitchen hearth. The house that had been cold was warm, thoroughly and genuinely, in every room. That night, she stood at her window and looked out at the dark garden, and she thought about the Farr letter and the legal process, and the challenge that Cale was already drafting with the palace's formal advisors. She thought about Marcus, who would learn soon if he had not already. She thought about the tribunal and the time it would take and the months ahead. None of it frightened her, not anymore. She had something to stand on. She had people beside her. She had made, finally, the kind of choice that is not a response to something, but a declaration of something. A choice made from within, rather than from without. She looked at the dark garden, and she thought about her mother, who had left at 17 and built her own life, who had put stones and leaves on windowsills, because she believed small beautiful things mattered. She thought about what her mother would say if she could see this. She thought her mother would say, "Yes, you found it. Not because someone gave it to you. Because you walked out into the rain one night with nothing, and kept walking until you did." She went to bed. In the morning, there would be work. There would always be work. Cale needed routine. Eli needed teaching. Wren needed someone to tell him that the structure he had built with sticks in the garden was actually quite impressive. There were legal documents to be reviewed, and responses to be drafted, and a formal challenge to be mounted that would take months and cost effort. She was not afraid of effort. She closed her eyes and thought, "All right, let everything come. I am ready." And she was. The challenge was filed 3 days later. It ran to 14 pages and cited 7 separate grounds on which Farr's claim was legally vulnerable. The advisors who drafted it were the best Cale could commission, and they had worked through 2 nights to finish it on time. The first ground was temporal. The claim had been inactive for 40 years without renewal, which under 4 of the 6 signatory territories' own legal codes constituted abandonment. The second was evidentiary. The research Farr had cited was preliminary, and had not been formally entered into any registry. A claim could not be activated on unpublished research. The third was procedural. No notice had been given to the subject of the claim before it was activated, which violated the basic rights outlined in the very agreement Farr had cited. There were 7 grounds in total. Cale walked Lena through each one at the kitchen table the morning after it was filed, not because she was required to understand it, but because he had decided, apparently, that she was going to understand everything that involved her from now on. She asked questions. He answered them. Owen refilled their coffee cups 3 times. Wren appeared at one point, looked at the papers, asked if it was boring, was told it was very important, said okay, and went to find the wooden horse. The formal response from Farr's office came 8 days later. It was less courteous than the first letter. It acknowledged the challenge, and stated that it would be reviewed by the Interterritorial Tribunal Board, and that a hearing date would be set within 90 days. 90 days, 3 months of formal process. Cale read the letter and set it aside and said, "90 days is within our capacity to manage." "Yes," Lena said, "it is." What she did not say, but felt, was that 90 days was nothing. She had survived a public rejection and walked alone into a storm and found her way, by accident or fate or her own stubborn refusal to be finished, into a house that needed her, and people she needed. She had done that in a single night. 90 days was more than sufficient. Marcus's response came separately. It was a short note, formal, withdrawing the contract claim. No explanation. She suspected Farr had told him to step back, that Marcus's involvement was complicating the legal picture. Or perhaps Marcus had simply understood, finally, that the person he had dismissed was no longer available to be reclaimed. She hoped it was the latter, not from bitterness. She had moved past bitterness quickly, which surprised her. She hoped it because it meant he had understood something real, that what he had chosen to see as ordinary in her had not been ordinary at all, and that he would be wiser in what he overlooked from now on. She thought about that for a while, then she put it away and went to find Eli, who was waiting with a question about bone structure that was more advanced than she expected and considerably more interesting. The weeks moved into December. The Northern Territory turned cold in a way that felt settled rather than sharp, the deep cold of a place that has committed to winter and is not apologizing for it. The palace adapted around them. More firewood, more stew from Owen's kitchen, mornings that were dark and slow and warm inside. The bonding ceremony, such as it was, happened on a Sunday afternoon in the sitting room, with no one present except Owen and Polly and Harriet Cole, who had come back because Owen had contacted her again, and the three boys, who had been told what was happening, and had all responded in their own ways. It was not a large ceremony. It was not public. It was quiet and completely certain. And when it was done, Eli said, with absolute precision, "Now, it is official." "It was already official," Wren said. "In a different way," Eli said. "Now it is the other kind of official." "What is the difference?" Wren said. "The kind that is written down," Eli said. Wren thought about this. "Is the written down kind better?" he said. "It is more difficult to undo," Eli said. "Good," Wren said, and went back to what he was doing. Cale, from his position on Lena's lap, said something that was almost a word. Everyone agreed it probably counted. Owen, who had been standing near the door with the quiet expression he wore when something had turned out correctly after a long effort, said, "I will put the kettle on." And he went to the kitchen, and the room settled back into the ordinary afternoon it had been, and outside the winter light was low and gray and soft, and inside the house was warm. Lena sat in the sitting room with Cale on her lap and Wren beside her, explaining something about birds again, and Eli at the table, doing something with careful concentration, and she felt the permanence of it, the solid weight of it, the way a thing feels when it has been chosen and sealed and will not be undone. She looked at Cale. He was looking at her. He had been looking at her, she thought, for most of the afternoon. Not the measuring look, not the careful analytical one, just the simple looking of a person who wants to see something and is no longer telling himself not to. She looked back. Outside, the December light faded early, the way it did this far north, afternoon becoming evening almost without transition. The lamps were lit. The fire was tended. Owen's supper was ready by 5, and the table was full, and the house was the loudest it had been since she arrived, which was saying something. She sat at her place, and was home, and the word home no longer carried the weight of everything she had lost. It carried something different now. It carried what she had found. The tribunal hearing was held in February, on the coldest day of the year. It took place in a neutral building in the Central Territory, a formal room with long windows and high ceilings, and the smell of old documents that legal rooms always carry, as if the past is trying to make itself present through the air. There were 7 members of the Interterritorial Board seated at a curved table, and there were representatives from the Northern Realm and from the Eastern Reach, and there were advisors and formal witnesses, and Owen, who had insisted on coming, and who sat in the back with his coat folded on his lap, and his face neutral, and his presence absolutely immovable. Harriet Cole was there too. She was not required to be. She had come because she said the Western Territory had an interest in how heritage claim law was applied, which was true, and also because Lena suspected she simply did not like Gideon Farr, and had been waiting for an opportunity to say so formally. Lena sat beside Cale at the representative table. She wore the dark dress she had bought with the first month of her wage, which was a practical and well-made garment, with nothing theatrical about it. She wore no jewelry except a simple ring. She sat up straight, and she looked at the tribunal board when they spoke, and she looked at her own advisors when they spoke, and she looked at Gideon Farr when he presented his case, and she held his gaze every single time he looked at her. He looked at her a great deal. She looked back. His case was presented well. He was a precise and experienced man, and he had been building this for months. He produced the original claim document, and the lineage research, and the 40-year-old interterritorial agreement. He produced correspondence about the Morrow line, and records that traced 3 generations of its documented history. He was thorough, and he was sure of himself. She noticed, and she thought the tribunal noticed, that he was most sure of himself when he was citing old agreements, and least sure when the newer precedents came up. Which they did. The Northern Realms advisors had done their work. The challenge took 3 hours to present. It was technical and thorough, and she understood most of it, which she would not have said 6 months ago. 3 months in the Northern Palace with access to its library and Eli's relentless questions, and Cale's habit of explaining things he was thinking through, had developed her considerably. She followed each argument. She noted when the board members leaned forward, and when they made notes. The strongest argument, the one she watched land on the board with the particular weight of something settling into place, was the third, that the claim subject had not been notified before activation. Under the very agreement Farr was citing, that notification was required. It had not been given. The claim was procedurally invalid from the moment it was activated. One of the board members, a woman with white hair and reading glasses, and the manner of someone who has been doing this for 30 years, and has no patience for sloppiness, said, "This is a significant procedural issue, Mr. Farr." Farr said that the notification requirement was typically interpreted as a guideline, not a binding rule. The woman said, without inflection, "The document says, 'shall be notified.' That is not a guideline." There was a brief silence. The hearing went on for another hour after that, but she felt the shift in the room at that moment. Things continued because process required them to continue, but she felt the outcome taking shape, the way you feel a tide that has changed direction before the water visibly moves. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. She and Cale sat in a smaller room with their advisors while the deliberation happened. Owen brought tea from somewhere. Harriet Cole said nothing, but sat in a corner with her arms folded, and her expression the one she wore when she was quietly satisfied. When they were called back in, the board chair read the decision in the flat, careful voice that legal decisions require. The claim was dismissed. The procedural violation was found to be material and binding. Additionally, the board found that the 40-year dormancy period, while not automatically invalidating under all signatory territories' laws, raised sufficient questions about the claim's continued validity, that it could not be sustained without significant additional process that the board was not prepared to authorize, given the procedural failure. The ruling noted, in its final paragraph, that the subject of the claim had established formal and documented membership in the Northern PAC prior to the claim activation, which further complicated the claim's standing. The ruling, in short, said no on every possible level. Farr accepted the decision with the composed expression of a man who has lost a formal argument and is not going to show anything about that publicly. He nodded at the board. He gathered his papers. As he was leaving, he looked at Lena. She looked back. He said, very quietly, not loudly enough for anyone else, "Your mother was a remarkable woman." She looked at him. She thought, he knew her, or he knew enough about her to say that. "I know," she said, equally quietly. He nodded once, then he left. She stood for a moment after he was gone, thinking about that exchange, about what it meant, about the family her mother had walked away from at 17, and what they had expected of her, and what she had chosen instead. She thought about the bloodline, which was apparently real, and the ability that had been documented in the line, the healing ability, and whether what she had done in 3 years as a healer's assistant was natural aptitude, or training, or something older than either. She decided it did not particularly matter. She was a healer because she had chosen to be, had worked at it, had shown up every morning and stayed late, and cared about it. Whatever the bloodline contributed, it was hers now, in the way all things become yours when you commit to them fully. She turned around. Cale was standing behind her. He looked at her with the look she knew now, the one that was paying full attention, and not pretending otherwise. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked out together, into the corridor, into the cold winter building, out through the doors and into the February air, which was sharp and bright and completely honest about what it was. Owen was directly behind them. He said, when they reached the steps, "The carriage is waiting." "Thank you, Owen," she said. "The boys are at home," he said. "Wren has built something in the garden." He would not say what. "Eli has been reading your notes on infection response and has questions that he said are time-sensitive." "Of course he does," she said. "Cale has said what Polly believes may be his first actual word," Owen said. He said this with the precise tone of someone saving the important information for last. She stopped. "What word?" she said. Owen said, "Polly believes it was her name. Your name." She looked at Owen. She looked at Cale. Cale's expression did the thing it always did when something moved him more than he wanted to show. The small fracture at the edges of the stillness. The thing she had learned to read. "We should go home," she said. They went home. The carriage moved north through the February countryside, through bare trees and gray fields and the wide winter sky, and she sat across from Cale and watched the land go past, and thought about what she was going home to. Not the legal category of it, not the formal documents, but the actual substance. 3 children, a house that was warm, an older man who made too much coffee, a woman from the Western Territory who kept reappearing because she had decided to. A man across from her who was looking out the window and who had skipped the creaking step at midnight for months out of consideration for sleeping people he did not know yet, and who she now understood had been kind long before anyone was watching. She thought about Graywood, about the hall and the paper lanterns, and the moment she had said all right and walked out. She thought about it without pain. The pain had not disappeared exactly. It had just found its correct size, small and finished, the size of something that is over. She thought about her mother's face in the photograph in her bag. She thought about stones and leaves on windowsills. She thought, I know what she meant. I understand it now. Small, beautiful things. They are not small. They are the whole thing. They are every single thing. The carriage pulled into the Northern Palace grounds in the late afternoon, and the gate opened, and the drive was familiar under the wheels, and through the window she could see the garden, and in the garden there was a 5-year-old boy standing beside a structure of sticks and dried grass, and what appeared to be one of Owen's ladles, watching the carriage arrive. Wren, waiting. The carriage stopped. She opened the door and stepped out before anyone helped her, because she had not waited to be helped in a long time, and did not intend to start. The cold air hit her face. The garden was pale and dry in the winter light. Wren ran across the garden at his usual prohibited speed. He stopped in front of her and looked up at her with his face that hid nothing. "Did it go well?" he said. "It went very well," she said. He considered this. "Then you are staying," he said. "I was always staying," she said. He put his arms around her, briefly, firmly, the hug of a child who has a lot to do and cannot give this more than 10 seconds but means it entirely. Then he stepped back. "Come and look at what I built," he said. She followed him across the garden. She heard the carriage behind her, heard Cale step out, heard Owen's voice directing something practical. She followed Wren to the structure of sticks and grass and ladle, which turned out to be, he explained at length, a winter shelter for birds. "Does it work?" she said. "I do not know yet," he said. "The birds have not arrived. But I made it correct, I think. I looked at a picture in a book." "Eli helped you find the book," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Wren said. He said it was practical to research before building. I said I preferred to build and then research if something went wrong. He looked at the structure. We compromised. She crouched down beside it. "I think the birds will find it," she said. Wren looked at it carefully. "I think so too," he said. Behind her she heard the house door open, Polly's voice, and beneath it, small and clear and newly certain, a baby's voice, saying a sound that was most definitely a name. She straightened. She turned around. Cale was standing at the edge of the garden path, holding Cale, who had apparently decided that the moment his mother came home was the correct moment to demonstrate his new skill. Cale was looking at Lena with his focused dark eyes, and he said it again, louder, more committed, the way babies say things once they understand that language works. Her name, quite clearly. She crossed the garden. She took Cale from Cale and held him against her shoulder, and he pressed his face into her neck and said her name again, satisfied, as if to say, yes, that is the one. That is the right word for what you are. She looked at Cale over Cale's head. He looked back at her. His face was doing the thing she loved, the quiet breaking open of it, the version of him that existed when he was not managing anything and was simply here. He has been practicing, he said. I can tell, she said. Eli appeared in the doorway of the house. He looked at the scene in the garden with his measuring gaze. Then he looked at Lena directly. The claim was dismissed? He said. The claim was dismissed, she said. He nodded once. Good, he said. He held up a sheaf of papers. I have questions about infection response that cannot wait. Give me 5 minutes, she said. He went back inside. She stood in the winter garden with a baby on her shoulder, and a 5-year-old explaining his bird shelter beside her, and a 7-year-old waiting inside with medical questions, and the man she had chosen, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold air, and the house behind all of it, warm and lit and full. She thought about a bonding ceremony in a hall full of paper lanterns. She thought about a woman who had been told she was not enough. She thought, look what she built anyway. She went inside. The kitchen smelled like whatever Owen had been cooking since this morning. The fire was going. The table was already being set, Eli doing it with the precise movements of someone who has decided this is his contribution to the evening. Wren came in behind her, and immediately began explaining to Owen why the ladle was in the garden, which was a long explanation. She put Cale down on the kitchen rug, and he immediately tried to stand up, which he could not quite do yet, and fell, and tried again, with complete determination. She watched him. She thought, you are not your beginning. None of us are our beginning. We are what we chose to keep walking toward, in the rain, in the dark, with nothing but a thin blanket and a small first aid kit, and the stubborn refusal to be finished. That is what you are. That is what I am. She bent down and held out her hands to Cale, who grabbed them and pulled himself upright and stood, wobbling, triumphant, looking at her with the enormous satisfaction of a person who has just done something for the first time. Good, she said. There you go. And behind her the kitchen filled up and the table was set and the supper was ready and the Northern Palace held everything it was supposed to hold, tight and warm and permanent. And Lena Graves, who had once been told she was not enough, sat at the head of her table in her home and fed her family and was, finally, completely, exactly enough. After supper, after the boys were in bed, the house settled into the quiet it was best at, the kind of quiet that is not empty but resting. Eli asleep with his books stacked beside him. Wren in the middle of a story he was telling himself. Cale in his room, breathing evenly, finally sleeping through the night with a regularity that had taken months to build and was now, reliably, real. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the stillness around her, and thought about the day. The tribunal room, Farr's face when the decision was read. The carriage ride home, Cale standing in the kitchen, wobbling and proud. Cale came in. He sat across from her. He did not say anything immediately, and she did not fill the silence, because they had both learned that their silences were comfortable enough to leave alone. After a while he said, Owen made a comment this afternoon. What did he say? She said. He said he had not seen this house feel like this since before Claire died. He looked at his cup. He said it as a good thing. It is a good thing, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the table, then at her. He was better at the direct look now. It had taken weeks, and he still sometimes redirected, but less than he used to. I want to tell you something, he said. I have been trying to find the right way to say it for several weeks. You can just say it, she said. I know, he said. He paused. Thank you. She waited. She waited. Not for the specific things, he said. Not for Cale sleeping, or Eli's questions, or the medical kit, or the bird shelter, which was Wren's. But you started it. You brought the books in. Not for the formal things. For what it feels like to live here now. He stopped. He looked at the table. I stopped knowing what that was supposed to feel like a long time ago. I managed the house and I managed the boys, and I managed everything that was required, and I was very good at managing things, and I did not notice for a long time that managing is not the same as living in. She looked at him steadily. I live in this house now, he said. I mean that in the way I had stopped meaning it for years. She was quiet for a moment. So do I, she said. He looked at her. Good, he said. The word was simple. It was the same word Eli used when something was correct and complete. She understood now that it ran in the family, that economy of expression, that way of saying an enormous thing in the smallest accurate word. She put her hand on the table, not reaching toward him, just placing it there. He looked at it and then put his hand beside it, close enough to touch, not quite touching, the specific distance of two people who are still learning where the edges of each other are. She could feel the warmth of his hand near hers. She did not move. Neither did he. They sat like that, side by side in the kitchen that was theirs, in the house that was theirs, in the quiet that was genuinely restful and not hollow. And the night outside was cold and clear and vast, and inside, everything was warm. She thought, this is it, this exact moment. Not any bigger than it is, and not any smaller. This kitchen, this table, this man beside me, this house full of children who are sleeping because they are safe, this quiet that is not absence but presence. This is it. She turned her hand over. He took it. That was all. Just that, and it was enough, completely and in all ways enough, which was the truest thing she had learned in the months since she had walked into the dark and the rain with nothing but a small bag and a stubborn heart, and ended up, somehow, exactly here. Outside the window, the winter stars were out. The garden was still. The Northern Territory slept under its cold, clear sky, and in a palace at its center, a woman who had once been told she was not enough held the hand of a man who was learning to hold on, and the house breathed around them, quiet and full and real. The end.